Most found out details from word of mouth, from RAMW, or direct outreach from me and other commissioners. As I've testified a number of times, the TOPS application process is not user-friendly and tends to be daunting and intimidating to those who are not very confident using computers or who have little or no previous experience using TOPS. DDOT apparently did not conduct meaningful tests of the application process with entries that would throw exceptions and require manual inputs. The need for an architect to draw plans is daunting and not easy for many establishments, be it the expense or even being able to find one available to take on work and meet the grim deadlines. The fees are a formidable obstacle for many establishments. They are substantially higher than the sidewalk cafe program. They place far greater worth on vehicle space than pedestrian space. Intentional or not, it sends a clear message that intrusions on car space is unwelcome. As a result, many restaurants will not be able to continue having one and prevent many new ones from having a streetery either. DDOT's attempts at a one-size-fits-all lacks consideration of any conditions on the ground. The design and placement requirements largely cannot be satisfied as written in an area like DuPont Circle, which is full of alleys, curbs, narrow street frontages, and trees. Flexibility in granting exceptions is vital to the process. DDOT tells applicants that the Public Space Committee can grant exceptions, but does not make this apparent in the documentation, nor have any criteria or guidance for how they are to be considered. The lack of coordination and communication will drag out the process and costs for many applicants. The streetery office hour service is largely regarded as a waste of people's time. Staff does not have authoritative knowledge of the program. They are at a loss with technical questions. Promised follow-ups do not take place in a timely manner, if at all. The advice given for most questions is to submit an application and it'll be sorted out during the review process. Adding to the confusion, DDOT is telling current streetery owners to get their applications in by November 30th and then continue with the old streetery until their application is processed. This is a cop-out that can prove costly for applicants, as there is no way of knowing issues will arise, whether they can be resolved, or if the application will be approved. In spite of my frustration with the delays in rollout, I find it necessary to support and request the December 1 deadline be paused for another pass to be made at improving the regulations, adjustments for the application process, and publishing documented workflows for the review and exception. Applicants must have full confidence in the chances of their applications being approved, not left in limbo pouring money into the process and then being told they're out of luck. Streeteries provide vitality and activation in our neighborhoods and city. We should do all we can to keep the program going. I ask the council to take necessary and timely action now and require you to make necessary changes and improvements for the streetery program. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Next, let me turn to Commissioner Duramo. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you. Thank you for hosting us here today. My name is Miguel Trindade Duramo, and I serve as Commissioner for Meridian Hill. I'm also the chairman of ANC 1B, which is the U Street Commission. I'm very pleased to appear today with my friends Commissioner Wood, who's the chair of the Adams-Morgan Commission, Commissioner Sherman, who's the chair of the Columbia Heights Commission, Commissioner Ruckauer, who represents DuPont Circle, and Commissioner Littauer, who represents Woodley Park. This group knows a thing or two about streeteries. My commission spends a lot of time thinking about how to create and sustain vibrant commercial corridors in this city. That's why we convene a U Street Business Roundtable, where our conversations with owners and operators frequently revolve around the same type of issue we're discussing here today. How do we best use public space to create a conducive business environment? How do we incorporate citizens and customers and various modes of transit, yes, including cars, to share space meaningfully and safely? In doing so, how do we respect principles of equity? How do we allocate scarce public space to advance our broader goals as a community? At their best, streeteries can achieve many of our goals. A blend of private enterprise and public space, streeteries attract new customers to our food and beverage businesses, the anchors of our commercial corridors, which, as I don't need to tell you, find themselves in a difficult operating environment. At their best, streeteries are welcoming, festive, and social, the precise attributes that describe a vibrant commercial corridor. At their best, streeteries are exciting. They give me, personally, confidence that this city is looking to and learning from the most innovative cities in the world with respect to the human-centric use of public space. I'm in mind of the pedestrianization of Broadway in New York, or the Garden Roads program that's greening Paris block by block with a focus on calming traffic in residential areas and limiting traffic on city blocks that contain schools. As an allocation of public space, streeteries generate more revenue than parking. If we assume that an average dinner check in Adams Morgan comes to $25, and yes, that's a conservative estimate nowadays, then a streetery would generate more revenue than a parking spot as long as it welcomes at least 280 diners a month, an average of just 9 patrons a night. Just 9 customers a night are sufficient to make a streetery more valuable to the district's economy than a parking space. To be sure, many of our streeteries are not in mint condition. Many are disused, unless you count the rats sheltering underneath. That's why my commission has supported modernization and standardization. We've advocated for removing unsightly and disused structures expeditiously so that we can return that space to optimal usage. But the business owners in my commission cannot brook the onerous fees associated with this program update. They are, in essence, a disincentive to vibrant commercial corridors. Reverting public space from productive commercial and community use to parking will deaden our corridors, increase congestion, and reintroduce cars to busy nightlife zones where they endanger pedestrians and create the type of logistical challenges that MPD, DDOT, and other agencies are currently struggling to manage on U Street, for example. I urge the district to recenter citizens, business operators, and their customers in its thinking about streeteries. I urge the district to take a moment to engage in a visioning exercise. How do we want our commercial corridors to work? What future do we imagine for U Street, for Adams Morgan, for Mount Pleasant, that's conducive to creating vibrant commercial corridors? To date, I don't think the district has engaged in a sustained visioning exercise for U Street, for example, leaving it to make piecemeal decisions rather than holistic decisions guided by that vision. I look forward to participating in those conversations. We've offered my commission as a partner in any of those, and we stand ready to advise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner and Chairman. Thank you. Next, let me turn to Commissioner Peter Wood.
Good morning. Thanks for having us here. Really appreciate the opportunity to have this roundtable. I think it is overdue and welcome for a lot of reasons, which I'll get into. So my name is Peter Wood. I am an ANC commissioner in Adams Morgan, representing ANC 1C03. I'm also the chairperson of 1C. However, this testimony reflects my capacity as individual commissioner, and Commissioner Scott Olson will be representing the full commission in a little bit. So I'll just kind of want to go over some main points that have stuck out as I've been commissioner, and I began as commissioner for Adams Morgan January 2021. So I've seen a lot firsthand of the transition from pre-ish pandemic life to whatever this is now. And first thing that stands out is that streeters are popular among residents, popular among diners that are visiting neighborhoods like Adams Morgan without necessarily living in the neighborhood, popular among many business owners, popular among staff, as long as the, I guess, logistics of being able to serve people on the sidewalk in the streeteries are manageable. But streeters are popular. We even have some data coming in. I had a resident email me the other day saying that he went and conducted a survey on 18th Street and had saw that over 80% of residents were in favor of keeping streeteries over turning into parking. And I haven't collected hard data, but that's probably roughly about what I've observed with residents as well, that most people really like them. And they have a lot of benefits, that it is something that was important because of COVID restrictions, of course, but one, it's something that's been utilized in other parts of the world for many more years than that. And in Adams Morgan specifically, and probably DC in general, we see that having streeteries has made it so people that are often rowdy at bars and restaurants, I think, are less rowdy because there's people out and about. I think it's also been good for avoiding things like vacant areas on streets, which is good for deterring crime, for example. Permanent rules are important, like the extension of temporary rules for a long time has been okay, but turns into something problematic because it's kind of been piecemeal. So the idea of turning something permanent and having standardization and modernization is something that I support, and I see it as a good thing. But that doesn't mean that any sort of permanent rules are going to be good. And it seems like that these are probably rules that in some ways are counterproductive to the goal of maintaining streeteries that can help our local business community thrive and that can help our city become a place of investment and overall, I guess, satisfaction. And I get it. Cold weather especially complicates streeteries. I mean, a lot of the world does on-street dining, but a lot of the world has good weather, and we have winter here. So that's where the rules can get complicated, but it needs to be thought of in ways that makes it so that businesses are incentivized to keep the streeteries, as opposed to what is almost uniformly the case right now, it's too expensive and the rules are too restrictive. So businesses that would like to have them are probably not going to, not because they're fundamentally against the idea of streeteries, but because it's not practical, particularly in this moment where it's really hard for small businesses. And I think that's kind of common knowledge right now that it's a hard time in the District of Columbia for reasons mostly out of our control, but we should be taking action to make sure that our local economy can do well and not taking actions that is essentially penalizing places for wanting to stay in business. The new costs are too expensive, the restrictions are not helpful, and the public participation and try to understand this has been lackluster. Not necessarily this committee's responsibility. I think it falls more on the mayor's office. Adams Morgan and me in specific as chair for the last 3 years, I think is a unique position to comment on this. ANC1C has not, as far as I know, ever been officially engaged with by the mayor's office on the single pilot program for streeters in the city. Still don't actually know what it officially entails. Don't know why it was paused. That's what I was told secondhand it was paused. Don't know what's happening with its expiration. Haven't ever had any communication at all except for a generic press release from last year that was sent out to the entire city. Would make sense to come to the commission that has been dealing with this for years to get our input and to voice the views of all of our constituents. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened. There has been communication with the Business Improvement District, and thankfully they've talked to us and reflected on their communications with DDOT. And they say the same thing. The costs are high. I think it's fascinating, and I don't have time to go into this, but I was told by the bid at our meeting last night, they said that the problem is that the cost of maintaining the pilot is too expensive. But the pilot was a one-time expense of $750,000 to have businesses voluntarily have the infrastructure they paid to put on 18th Street removed. I don't think they were reimbursed for that. The city put in infrastructure that has modernization, uniformization, and then they're going to take that away, saying it's too expensive. But the businesses ended up having to kind of take a hit and are doubly losing because they lost the stuff that they already put there in the first place. So I think Commissioner Olson will go into some of these points later, but essentially, don't kill the program. This is in effect killing the program, and these rules should be modified in ways that streeters can stand. And in the unfortunate event that streeteries are going to be forced out by overpricing, at the very least, commissions like ours should be engaged with seriously to discuss what comes next without automatically turning it into park again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wood. Next, let me turn to Commissioner Jacobson, who's joining us online as well.
Thank you, Chair Allen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I will keep my remarks fairly brief. I want to thank the two panelists that came before me. I think they raised a lot of the same points that I would want to raise. Main things that I want to really push on is that I think increasing these costs will phase out a lot of the existing streeteries, and I think these streeteries are what make Ward 1 and a lot of the nightlife and other areas in our city great. When I've talked to other people about these plans, they share the concerns that, 18th will come back into a pretty busy road and not be something that you'd want to go out to enjoy your day. And I think 18th Street is a great part of Ward 1. I know it's not in our commission, but I want to make sure that we're doing what we can to help foster more of these streeteries. I know there are some concerns that we want to raise revenue from these streeteries. And if we were to get rid of them, that we'd be able to raise money from parking. But I don't think that is a smart trade-off given the other benefits that streeteries bring. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Let's see. Next, I've got Commissioner Littauer, who's here in person.
Good morning, Councilmember Allen and members of the committee and all those joining online. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to testify this morning. My name is Samuel Littauer. I am the ANC Commissioner for SMD 3C01, serving Woodley Park, and I am the co-chair of the Committee on Safe, Sustainable, and Equitable Transportation on 3C. I hope that today's discussions lead to a renewed commitment towards a permanent program that benefits both our neighbors, neighborhoods, and small businesses alike. As we all know, when DDOT's new streetery guidelines take effect at the end of the month, the structures that have become a fixture of DC's dining scene will be disincentivized to the point of elimination and removal, as it's been said, both through the increased operating costs and fees, but also through additional regulatory burdens imposed on businesses. In my opinion, the decision reflects a pretty serious miscalculation in the forms of capital that this program has created over the years. And it also represents a misprioritization of our civic values here in local government. Streeteries, as we've discussed, are revenue generators for the city. They bring in money to the city through sales taxes on diners, of course, but also to small businesses by allowing them to welcome in more diners and patrons. And also, and perhaps most importantly, streeteries are a revenue generator of social capital. It's the connectedness between people, the creating opportunities for residents to encounter other neighbors in their community organically, and adding to the perception that a neighborhood is in fact alive and vibrant. And small business owners agree. The DDOT 2021 Streetery Program survey reported that 87% of small businesses reported an increase in revenue. And that average increase of revenue is about 34% because of the DDOT Streetery program. An overwhelming 89% of small business owners and streetery permit holders supported making the streetery program permanent. Obviously, this survey was during the peak of the pandemic, but notably, I would add that recent reports from restaurateurs in DC have cited that since the federal overreach in Washington, DC, some are referring to our current moment as a pandemic 2.0. Small businesses need our help. Local neighborhoods need policies and ideas that promote vibrance. And I think a path towards outdoor dining, permanence, and pedestrianization is a way to make this happen. In ANC3C, we've actually benefited from that type of transition. We've benefited from an increase in permanent infrastructure that prioritized people and public space thanks to DDOT's pedestrianization of the service lane in Cleveland Park on Connecticut Avenue. The temporary program in 2020, it allowed streeteries and small businesses to activate parts of the service lane and expand their business in Cleveland Park. DDOT, responding to the popularity of this program, moved forward with a permanent infrastructure proposal to fully pedestrianize the streetscape, creating a promenade that is now suitable for year-round utility, not just slapdash casual outdoor dining structures that might be, under critique around the district today. The space now hosts streeteries, yes, but it also hosts things like community events, art markets, and more. And it's a decision that shifted from a temporary solution to a permanent solution, resulting in neighborhood vibrance. In conclusion, perhaps the most common critique that I hear from streetery critics in DC is that while they may have been essential during the pandemic when people needed our support and dining was nearly impossible, streeteries are now a relic of a bygone era. And actually, while I'm in support of streeteries, I actually agree with that sentiment. Streeteries are a relic and a monument to the pandemic era. But I agree that they're a holdover, but they were implemented at a time when we all collectively agreed that we should orient our civic priorities around increasing opportunities for people to come together in person, supporting small business, connected to a sense of place in their neighborhoods. So if streeteries are in fact a pandemic relic, then they're reflective of a moment when we correctly ordered our local politics around building community and creating a built environment that fosters maximum public benefit. And I think we would be wise to recommit ourselves to that principle again. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Next, let me turn to Commissioner Jeremy Sherman, who I think is with us online.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairperson Allen and members of the Committee on Transportation and the Environment, and good morning to my fellow commissioners. My name is Jeremy Sherman. I represent Single Member District 1A04 in ANC 1A, which covers Columbia Heights. I'm also the chair of ANC 1A and the chair of our Small Business and Economic Development Committee, but I'm speaking today in my personal capacity. I want to start by acknowledging that the temporary streetery program has been a lifesaver for countless businesses since the program started. On 11th Street in Columbia Heights, at least 8 businesses have relied on streeteries to survive. These streeteries have created new energy and vibrancy, with neighbors dining outside and streetery spaces being utilized for community events like Sundress Fest, DC Witch Fest, Columbia Heights Day, and more, stimulating our local economy. For Queen's English, a small restaurant in my SMD with about 30 seats inside, their 15-seat streetery represents the difference between staying open and closing their doors. However, years into the temporary program, with no standardization or clear rules, I'm seeing deteriorating structures, and I hear from a lot of neighbors about trash and rodent issues, accessibility problems, and sometimes underuse. So when I first heard permanent guidelines were coming, I was incredibly relieved. Finally, standardization and support to help businesses manage streeteries in an organized and sustainable way. Unfortunately, the reality has been quite different. The process for small businesses to comply with permanent guidelines has been confusing and unclear. Business owners tell me it feels like jumping through hoops and red tape at a time when they're just trying to survive in a difficult economy. Many say the costs are prohibitive. They're hiring outside legal help and contractors just to figure out what needs to change. These are major investments for already stretched thin small businesses. The situation on 11th Street illustrates additional problems. DDOT is designing protected bike lanes along our corridor, but neighbors and businesses haven't heard meaningful updates in over a year. As one business owner told me, and I quote, "It's very unclear if the streetery plans even apply to us because the bike lane plans we've seen would change the dimensions of our current streetery. We're nervous to move forward, fearing the rules will change again and cost us more money," unquote. Another business on 11th Street told me they reached out to DDOT in early October to request removal of their existing structure to begin the process of coming into compliance. It's now November 6th, and nothing has happened. And they still haven't received clear guidance or timelines on that process. Businesses are worried about penalties once enforcement begins, even when they have made an earnest effort to come into compliance. Let me be clear about what concerns me most. The worst case scenario in my eyes is maintaining the current free-for-all system, confusing for businesses and leading to poorly maintained streeteries. But the second worst case scenario is nearly as bad. Hundreds of businesses removing their streeteries simply because the process is too burdensome, resulting in the loss of crucial revenue and potentially lots of business closures. I strongly support streeteries. They've been a true lifeline for small businesses, generated sales tax revenue for the city, and brought new energy to our neighborhood streets. DDOT's own surveys have shown that streeteries increase business revenue by an average of 34% and allow 78% of restaurants to rehire or retain their staff. Some streeteries may no longer make sense, and I acknowledge that, and that space could return to parking or transform into other public uses. But for the businesses that have relied on streeteries for years and want to continue, we should be making the transition much clearer and much easier for them. It shouldn't be a guessing game. Small businesses need more transparency, reasonable timelines, and coordination between DDOT's various projects. They need clarity on costs and requirement without having to hire lawyers and consultants. And they need to know that when they invest in compliance, the goalposts won't move again 6 months later. I urge this committee and the council to simplify the compliance process, consider extending the compliance timeline, reconsider the high costs that are prohibitive for small businesses, and ensure that DDOT is coordinating its various infrastructure projects so that businesses aren't caught in limbo. As a neighbor and an ANC, I'm standing by ready to be a partner on all of this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Next, let me turn to Commissioner Lose, who's the chair of ANC2E, joining us virtually, and I believe has a presentation as well. So we'll work to make sure you get the screen sharing ability to do that. Commissioner Lose, are you there?
Oh, I am. I'm just waiting for the stream to up. I didn't.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone.
Yep.
I'll just wait for the presentation if I could.
Got it. Yep. Just 1 second.
Thank you very much.
We're pulling that up right now. That work?
Yeah, and just if you could go to the front slide. Thank you.
Okay. I think we've got it set now.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You got
Good morning, and I love hearing the other ANCs, so thank you for everyone being here, and thank you to the committee. I am Gwendolyn Lowe's ANC 2E06, and I'm the current chair of ANC 2E. I am testifying behalf of my ANC, as well as just observations across this experience. That next slide. So the background here, Georgetown has the most streeteries in the district per the DDOT map. And since 2020, we've been very involved in this, collaborating and providing feedback. We have frequently spoke with restaurants. We're supportive of outside dining while also recognizing the balance for a range of community needs for our sidewalks, our roads, safety, vacancy enforcement, historic preservation. We have reviewed the draft guidelines in 2024 and did formal resolutions. It was a very time-consuming process. And we put links into our resolutions that you can see in the slides, asking for things like enforcement being stronger, no overhead structures, and that's for sight lines, financial transparency. We gave input multiple times on trash management, aesthetics, usage levels, impact, fee transparency. And we very frequently meet with our bid, given for the last few years, they've been managing the majority of the streeteries in ANC 2E and issued multiple resolutions. And there's also links here. Just a note, this was a surprise roundtable. Even though we have the most streeteries, we were not invited or made informed of this. So this is really a last minute presentation that I did very quickly. I'm going to bring up 2 points. Next slide. On the ground observations, 3 of them here. The permanent application process is confusing and chaotic for both the applicants and the reviewers. This public process must be improved. I think you're hearing that from all the commissioners. We have changing deadlines, top applications missing. I have applications in my tops from other ANCs. None of the exceptions are noted, so we don't know what exceptions are, and there's not even a list if streeteries do have exceptions. Some entities have public space committee dates, some do not. Second point, this is a very significant program for the district. I think no one's questioning that we don't want some forms of streeteries across the city. We do. Yet it appears no new positions or existing staff resources have been assigned. The program needs to be appropriately resourced, especially during the permanent launch period. We have public health because of pest control, safety, neighborhood character deserves the enforcement, the monitoring. And I assume some level of fees can help with this. I don't know if people have looked at average square footage cost in various neighborhoods, for instance. And most streeteries require an exception right now. They don't meet the buffer requirements, sight lines. We need to look to DDOT to be clear that it's no longer believes in the safety rationale behind the guidelines or do the work of enforcing, except in unique cases or neighborhoods. Otherwise, the city's really ignoring its own expert advice and permitting others to do. It puts us in a very awkward position. And should we be concerned for the safety? I can't answer that question. I'm not the experts, you all are. Next slide. We were issuing some recent resolutions, and I can forward those to you all. We both reviewed our Georgetown bid application for block permits, as well as started to review the applications for, I think we have about 25 streeteries, and we also now have a parklet streetery. The timeframes, just high level, it requires a forever permit. These really should be 2 to 3 year permits. I think if there's anything we've learned that we need to collaborate on the vision and the evolution of this, both the commercial, the residents, the users. We are not at a place where we should have a permanent set of guidelines and a permanent location. Moreover, transportation modes are in constant evolution as we add more hotel rooms, apartments, environmentally friendly transportation. And so we need to really look at this carefully as it evolves. We do in Georgetown want Old Georgetown Board review, and I'm not going to highlight that. It only applies to us. Locations, our ANC has thought about whether or not the street seating should move next to the building so people aren't eating in the street. Again, back to the safety. If those guidelines are actually, those were based upon DDOT analysis, they're all written out like the buffers, maybe moving to the side helps, but it also may review the fees, which we actually might need some of them to run the program and get resources. We've had concerns about trash and also bike corrals that we've been working on with our bid. Last slide. This is a really large scale program and we need collaboration. I'm glad that these streeteries are module, meaning they're not permanent because we don't have yet a well-tested, thoughtful, future-focused streetscape. I think you've heard Jeff talked earlier about visioning, and without applying money, without a vision to make things permanent is irresponsible, especially for us in a historic district. We want it to be future focused and change while also continuing to be beautiful and respect the past. So I appreciate the testimony and we want to collaborate, and we have been very actively involved in this. And it is, we really need to get some resources on it. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner. And last for this panel, let me turn to ANC 1C, Commissioner Scott Olson.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Scott Olson. I'm Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner for Single Member District 1C05, which is part of Commission 1C, which includes Adams Morgan.
Commissioner, sorry, could you speak a little closer to the microphones? That way it'll get picked up for everybody else. Thanks.
Which includes the Adams Morgan neighborhood, especially 18th Street from Florida Ave to Columbia Road. This testimony represents the views of our full commission as voted on last night, November 5th, at an official ANC meeting. We want to make 3 points. First, it is our commission's understanding that Adams Morgan residents broadly support the streetery program. Our constituents like what the streeteries have done for our neighborhood. We like the street the way it is now better. We want to keep it this way. It makes Adams Morgan really special. Second, we ask that DDOT lower the costs requires for Adams Morgan businesses to keep their streeteries, even if that's on some kind of temporary or staged basis. In response to the current fees, Adams Morgan businesses will almost all stop their participation in the streetery program. In other words, the current fee structure will de facto kill the streetery program in Adams Morgan. Our constituents do not want this, and we hope that DDOT can continue the experiment, can continue the spirit of the pilot program, and can continue tweaking and experimenting rather than killing the program outright. We note that there may be other ways to make the program more workable for Adams Morgan businesses beyond lowering the fees, such as allowing the streeters to have higher walls that better retain heat in winter. We urge DDOT to keep an open mind and maintain a spirit of experimentation. Third, if DDOT cannot find a way to keep Adams Morgan businesses in the streetery program, we do not want the streetery spaces, to reflexively revert to typical street parking. We do support tweaks to the existing design, for example, creating more loading zones. That being said, there are many ways this public space can be used, of which typical street parking is only one, and we ask that DDOT give due consideration to other options. For example, DDOT could retain the existing platform infrastructure of the streeteries, but turn them into public parklets maintained by DDOT rather than as private dining spaces maintained by individual businesses. These platform parklets would maintain the neighborhood experience our constituents enjoy and also provide a communal benefit to those Adams Morgan businesses. We expect that DDOT would consult closely with ANC 1C on these alternatives. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thanks to all of our commissioners who have weighed in here. I appreciate it. And I would say a lot of what you said is exactly consistent with my concerns as well. I didn't hear anybody say, we think DDOT got it right. I didn't hear a single commissioner say, I think that these permanent regulations are spot on. What I did hear is a lot of commissioners say, we need to create standards. We need to create those permanent rules and regulations. So not opposition to the direction and the movement of where we've got to go, but I heard everyone recognize the benefit that this can have for our local businesses and our small businesses, and a real willingness, it seems like, from everybody to be engaged. Many of you already deeply are in thinking through how to land this in a better way. is kind of the theme generally what I heard, and I do not disagree with you. I wanted to check a couple of folks just to make sure I heard correctly. Commissioner Ruckauer, I think I heard you say that your ANC provided comments and a resolution with recommendations, but none of them were accepted and you got no response. Did I hear that
Correct.
correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner,
Yeah.
yep. Okay. Commissioner Duramo, you said the not just the ANC, but the U Street Business Roundtable, if I have the name correct, provided recommendations. Did you get any type of response, or is it you just didn't see the recommendations reflected necessarily?
Ours were only limited to removing sort of disused, unsightly
Okay.
streeteries.
Did you feel like you did get a response though, and you got that engagement on that aspect?
That was only a month or two ago.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Commissioner Wood, I think I heard you talking about from ANC 1C not feeling engaged.
Yeah,
Not
that's
being
probably,
engaged?
I'd say that's an understatement. I've had zero engagement whatsoever, at least on the pilot program specifically. And as far as I know, Adams Morgan is the only location of a streetery pilot program in the city, and an investment of nearly $1 million by the city, as well as just being one of the main spots where streeteries have happened. So it's not like there should have been beyond the pilot program
Yeah.
more engagement. It's basically zero.
Okay.
And Councilmember Allen, I don't mean to interrupt you. This is Commissioner Lowe's. We also didn't, we did do resolutions to DDOT and did not hear back.
Okay.
Just so you're aware.
Thank you. Yeah, that's I wasn't necessarily yeah, I appreciate that because I wanted to kind of get a sense from our ANCs who took the time to obviously put forward recommendations, put forward resolutions. I'm gonna, in good faith, believe all of our ANCs are trying to be in good faith here, be constructive, as I think I've heard consistently across all your testimony, of both saying what you think works well about streeteries, but also acknowledging where it's trying to move towards those standardization. So the fact that you didn't get that type of engagement is really concerning. I want to pull a different thread on this as well, because there was something Commissioner Littauer and then Commissioner Loos, both of you touched on slightly differently, but I think you were both making somewhat the same points. And when we talked about the service lanes, for example, what you're really talking about is, again, how do we best use and choose to use our public space? And so by creating some degree of permanence, it gives both the abilities for a restaurant to have outdoor seating, gives community and civic space for other elements. I'm going to ask you to kind of just expand on that in just a moment, but for Commissioner Loos, the recommendation you had, for example, of saying, can we move that seating and those tables closer to the actual business front itself, and then be able to have pedestrians have a safe sidewalk space, perhaps kind of flipping the specific locations. What I'm concerned is in the permanent regulations, I'm not seeing anything that suggests let's move towards a rethinking of our public space, and let's look at the best aspects of what streeteries have done and be able to expand our public space, both for pedestrians to have safe spaces to walk, as well as the activation of that outdoor space. So let me start with Commissioner Littauer, and then Commissioner Loos will welcome your thoughts, kind of, if you want to add more context to what you were talking about around the almost flipping of the setup. But Commissioner Littauer, let me do it first, and then Commissioner Loos after that.
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember Allen. And you're exactly right. I'm in agreement with Commissioner Lowe's on the premise that a temporary solution is not an end and final solution. I firmly believe that we ought to learn our lessons from the temporary solutions to build in permanence that prioritizes people, especially when people are desperate for the chance to get together in person, build community, and experience a vibrant neighborhood. To refer back to the ANC 3C project that created the Cleveland Park Promenade, this very closely parallels what 18th Street may experience, where there were about 14 parking spots that were converted and absorbed from the service and utility lane into the extended sidewalk area, which is now activated year-round. And to the best of my knowledge, there are no ongoing public demonstrations or protests for people advocating for the promenade to be torn up and converted back to public parking. So to me, it underscores the reality that when we build in places that prioritize the social capital that is associated with a vibrant neighborhood, people, respond positively to that, and it increases engagement rather than, disincentivizing enjoying the vibrance of a neighborhood. So Commissioner Lowe's, I'll yield over to you for your comments.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, thank you. On a very high level, we in Georgetown, obviously our streeteries are primarily on M and Wisconsin. M is actually an evacuation route, so we're busier than potentially other areas. We do need a streetscape design before we start spending money on making these things permanent. And, there's loading, there's unloading. We've got some traffic that does have to come through. We've got trash removal, we have construction. So as we think about that, making a permanent process, how do we do that in a thoughtful way? And we're not there yet. And maybe moving some of the streeteries next to the buildings helps to alleviate some of the safety concerns that I assume the DDOT staff spent a long time creating those guidelines. And they're very clear about buffers, for instance, or sight lines. And I in no way want to put anyone at risk. And I'm going to respect guidelines. I don't think we should make a mockery of guidelines. If they exist, we need to follow them, especially if they're about safety. So yes, longer term, big streetscape visions, spend the money when we're ready and we've thought through the functions of the area. And then maybe in the meantime, one of the steps could be move the streeteries next to the buildings, those that still want to keep them. So I hope, council member, that was clear.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's helpful.
Yeah.
One of the things, again, sorry, Commissioner Littauer, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Allen, and thank you, Commissioner Lowe's. The only thing that I would add to kind of piece together some of the points that it sounds as if you are making, Commissioner Lowe's, to what Commissioner Peter Wood shared earlier today, is that the pilot program this past year cost $750,000, dollars, only for it to then be removed and for further costs to be incurred on local businesses. To me, I don't mean to misrepresent your comments, Commissioner Lowe's, but I do not think that spending more money to professionalize the staff at DDOT only to result in continued delays and a decrease in permanent infrastructure and an increase or a decrease in the number of streeteries is a pragmatic or effective solution. At this point, we might be putting good money after bad by not investing full-time in pedestrianizing some of these areas when we have the data and know, the ways that they contribute to a vibrant city.
Were you guys informed before that went up in Adams Morgan? Were you involved in it?
I'm guessing the question's for me. The answer is no.
Yeah, I mean, I feel badly, but that's just not right, right? Because you're on the ground and you do have, and that's all of our taxpayers' money, to spend that level of money and not actually speak with the community.
Yeah,
Not the way to do things.
We're going to be getting to that 750 conversation in a little bit as well. All right, well, that's really helpful from the philosophical side of it and how we want to spend our resources. And I agree with you, Commissioner Littauer. One of my concerns is that from the feedback I'm hearing from my ANC commissioners around the city now, the concern I'm hearing from a lot of our local businesses and many of the restaurants that have streeteries, or those that even might want to, we are going to end up with far fewer streeteries with these permanent regulations. We will have folks who maybe thought this was a great part of their business model and they won't do it now. We'll have folks that found it to be a great part of their business model and they're going to remove them. And every single one of you, just to make sure, because I want the record to be very clear, every single one of you highlighted what you saw as some problematic aspects of the pilot program that we want to learn from. When we see an abandoned or a dangerous or a streetery that is not working, no one's sitting here advocating that they want to see that continue. And I think that's important. Every single person here, every commissioner has kind of outlined ways that they want to see that change. So just in that vein, real fast, could you outline both on the feedback you've heard from your constituency of local businesses and your constituency of residents, what are some of the examples of where the pilot missed the mark? Where did you see a streetery that did not work the way we would all want it to, and that it warrants moving towards some type of standardization and change. And I will kind of open that up for everybody if you want to chime in with some of the examples you've seen. It would be very helpful. I'm obviously looking at the people that are sitting at the table in front of me, but anyone online, just if you want to raise your hand, I'll make sure I turn to you as well. Commissioner Littauer?
Yeah, thanks again. I have a piece coming out as an opinion piece in support of the Streetery Permanence initiative in the 51st later today. One of the things that I'd like to recognize is that the critics surrounding streeteries, especially the temporary structures, have merits. They can create accessibility issues in design. They can also, as Commissioner Trindade de Ramo added, they can also lead to homes for rats. And so that's where I agree that continuing a temporary approach to this problem is an ineffective solution to a real issue for the food service sector across the city. One way to address those accessibility concerns or to address, rodent infestations and mitigation is build that into permanent infrastructure. We can build fully accessible, sidewalks that bring more diners out, but it's hard to do that with temporary, slapdash structures that people may find unsightly now. It can be better, and we can build in accessible infrastructure that's accessible to people and maybe inaccessible to rats. So
Yeah.
that's my response.
And we see plenty of other
Thank
cities
you.
that have figured that out.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ramo?
Thanks. I don't want to detour too far from your direct question, but I do want to pick up on that point about the temporary nature itself being a problem. And I think Commissioner Los is articulating this well, which is that I'm afraid that we're just initiating another temporary solution. And I'm thinking about U Street because I know it best. We have a bus priority project that's going to come online soon, right? We have pressure from the business community to advocate for removing parking altogether. There's also a felt need to widen sidewalks because it's very crowded during peak nightlife times and that's not safe. And we have a whole situation at 9th and U where DDOT is trying to direct traffic and it's a bit chaotic. Putting new streeteries in that situation to me seems like I'm seeing a convergence of all these projects that's not being done thoughtfully, right? I'm not aware of any sort of collaboration across agencies to understand how all those things are coming online sequentially. So if we're going to put up new streeteries with onerous fees and new construction requirements, which of course we support, and then a bus priority project comes through and builds bulb outs and we have to reconfigure the parking and pull up the streeteries again, the businesses are really going to tear their hair out. So, I kind of leave that in your capable hands and in the agency and across agencies to think that through. I don't want, a demand for streetscape to mean that we can't do this for 3 years because we have to fund a study and then it changes hands and whatever. So please don't make that the answer. But at the same time, let's not build another temporary solution that we're tearing down in a year because we're doing bus priority or we're removing parking or we're adding more residential performance parking zones or something like that. It really needs to be a coordinated and holistic approach, please.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Let's see. Actually, Commissioner Wood has his hand up first. Commissioner Ruckauer, and I'll come right back to you. Commissioner Olson.
Thanks. So I got two examples. One's more specific than the other of where streeteries, at least to some degree, kind of have been lackluster. This is an arbitrary example, but on the route that I usually bike from home to work, there's a streetery just off of 14th Street, and it's on a side street. And because of the way it's constructed, it blocks the alley. And every time I bike there, I'm mentally preparing myself to get killed because someone could very easily, very kind of understandably pull out, and there's no way to see the traffic on the one-way street coming through. There's an unprotected bike lane, and of course, car traffic. I slow down, I go wide, I know how to handle it, but it's dangerous, and there's things like that elsewhere in the city, including in Adams Morgan, where there are needs to make sure that different flows of people that are moving about in different ways can get through safely. Another example, and there's not any specific one that I really need to hone in on, but a lot of times we saw that the size of the streeteries ended up being larger than what was really kind of a sustainable size for the number of clientele that were willing to frequent that streetery. It depends on the business, but I think that's really a comment to how streeteries are kind of born in DC and where they can go. They were born out of fear. It was the fear of a lot of small business owners saying, wait, if I don't have some way to generate revenue, I'm going to lose potentially everything. And that was really scary for a lot of people. I mean, I think we all understand very clearly the pandemic was and is very scary. And the economic impact of that is one of those dimensions of fear. But that fear resulted in one hand a good thing, which was a change of the rules so that we can be adaptive to unforeseen circumstances. But also it means that we have to kind of wiggle our way to figure out what works for different places and finding a threshold of where streeteries are a size that is not going to take up more space than makes sense for a business, and also recognizing that different businesses have different needs and that those needs will change over time is kind of the process I think that we should be focusing on, which is not finding ways to jack up the price so that we're pushing businesses even into a harder spot, but so that we can make it so that businesses have one more autonomy to kind of tailor these needs to what makes them thrive because they contribute to our neighborhoods, but also make sure that the burden of doing that doesn't fall disproportionately on those small businesses themselves, because we see time and time again that if we give too much autonomy to small businesses, that ends up just becoming another thing that they have to deal with, which they don't have staff to deal with it, so they just don't. So they go, well, I like the idea, but there's only 24 hours in the day, and I'm sleeping for 4 of those, so I'm going to put the rest of the time into trying to figure out revenue strategies, and I really hope that we can push forward in that direction.
You got it. I appreciate it. I'm going to turn to a couple of commissioners. We have a few dozen more witnesses. So after this, I'm going to turn to make sure we move to our next panel. But I have Commissioner Ruckauer, Commissioner Olson, then Commissioner Sherman. Okay, so I saw Commissioner Lose's hand. All right. And then I got to move on so we can get to our next witnesses too. But Commissioner Ruckauer.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So DDOT has this chronic cultural aversion to holistic planning. Everything seems to occur in little bubble universes that do not communicate with each other. So you have, like the bicycle team, which does one thing, active transportation. You've got the curbside team that doesn't communicate with the other folks. And then, you have like these long-term road streetscape programs that are often not communicating with the other users of the street. DDOT is notorious for saying one thing and then going radio silent for X amount of time, and then coming back and actually implementing something that is not what was planned. In the case of our 17th Street streetery and streetscape, we had a plan that was agreed upon with them in 2019 that was going to put in the protected bike lanes, be a pilot for one side commercial loading, and then then the pandemic hit, and we ended up having the streeteries placed. They had to be grafted onto this. They made changes to how the bike lane was going to be there, and then they changed the parking. The one side parking pilot didn't happen. So it's become it slowed down the traffic, but it did not. It did not really deliver on the promises they had made on how the street was supposed to work. Every effort that we've made to try and get them to improve this experience of the streeteries are easier for businesses to work with, get more up there, because a lot of them preclude neighboring establishments from getting them if they wanted one. And so it's just this runaround with them where they won't make certain changes, or they say that, oh, well, we have to do like this strategic bike plan before we can look at the bike lanes again, or consider making the street easier for the pedestrians to navigate. And that's why I was talking to you about the Plaza Act, somehow getting the street nominated for there to try and get some improvement. But the streetery access there, I mean, the streeteries are, they're a wonderful addition. They activate the space. They need some better TLC, but of course, DDOT is not making this easy. I mean, most of the restaurants there are getting like zero consistent information. We don't have. I think we've got like 2 streeteries that are kind of that are tucked away. That are just really bad examples of what could be wrong. We've got actually do have one on 17th Street, which DDOT has not been able to do anything about, or unwilling to do anything about, until they had the regular the final regs in. But we're not sure what's going to happen with that. How they're going to approach it, because I don't know the status of that establishment's application. So I think all of our concerns kind of come back to DDOT's culture, and I've been pushing for this for decades now, to get them talking to one another as a holistic, taking holistic approaches to street design, and to stop prioritizing vehicle throughput as the conditions of what they consider successful. I mean, they have to lose the Department of Highways mentality and mindset, and recognize that pedestrianization and public activations are just as important to the city's vibrance and health as being able to get cars to come through. So that's that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to reframe my question as well, just and only from the standpoint of time, because I need to make sure we get to our other witnesses. It's helpful if I could hear you outline, where have you seen examples of streeteries that have not worked the way we wanted, and changes that we should be considering as part of the permanence of standards. So I think I had Commissioner Olson next, then Commissioner Sherman, then Commissioner Lose.
I have 2 points. One is about occupancy. There's been some statements of a streetery being empty as a sign that something isn't working. I think that's sort of a tough argument, because restaurants operate on low margins, and this has been a very volatile time for restaurants. It's hard to hire staff. You can't necessarily support all those tables. So maybe as a business owner, you think you want to have more tables, but you can't get the staff to hire them. Perfect occupancy isn't really going to be possible. So I don't see that as a fault. So it's almost like a negative converse to your question. And the other one that comes up a lot that we hear is about aesthetics. I don't know that standardization is going to help that problem. That just means that individuals will either be happy with all of them or happy with none of them, rather than more of a patchwork. I think aesthetics are also tough, because if they look good, people don't talk about them. If you don't like them, then you're going to have a lot to say. So you get a lot of negative comments, but not positive ones. I think also one person's, what somebody might call blight, is often just that they prefer the dream that they could have found that as a parking spot. So I encourage you to downweight those sorts of comments.
Well, I don't think I would enjoy going out to restaurants if every single one of them aesthetically looked the exact same either. So there are safety standardizations that we would want to see, but I don't necessarily need them all to be just carbon copies of each other. Commissioner Sherman, then Commissioner Lose, and then we're going to move to our next panel.
Yeah, thanks. Columbia Heights and 11th Street were not part of the pilot program, but I think, just to speak to your question, Chairman, specifically, I think one of the biggest problems that I've seen with streeteries is a bit of a lack of consistency, right? One streetery is designed in this way with tables on the actual street with the barricades, and another one is sort of flush with the sidewalk and has complete coverage on top and bottom and no visibility, and another one next to it and is different, and they're all maintained completely differently. So I think there is the need for standardization. Not that they all have to look the same, but I think I'll throw out an idea, and I don't know if this is necessarily what I love. I love the idea, but something to ponder is, like, why can't there be 5 sort of pre-approved options? Why can't there be, maybe 5 approved vendors that a restaurant can contract with to have them put in a structure, and that structure can actually end up being removed by that contractor or that vendor when maybe wintertime comes or when the business changes hands. I mean, I think the trouble that I have personally with some of the permanence is that changes are going to happen. We have to acknowledge that DDOT makes changes to roads. We make changes to sidewalks. Like, putting something in fully permanent doesn't necessarily feel like realistic to me, but there should be these, pre-approved models that can be put in easily, taking the guesswork out for restaurants and business owners, and then can also be removed when it's needed to be cleaned on a seasonal basis or whatever it is. But like, it just makes it so that we achieve the public space part, we achieve the, the continuation of the program, we achieve supporting businesses in this, but also have more standardization and cleanliness, because there's just only a few options of how you can approach it. So again, I don't know if I love that idea, but like, I've had conversations with contractors who talk to vendors, who talk to businesses and say, like, we can actually do this for you. You just pay, a monthly lease, and we'll manage the space for you. We'll come in and pick it up in the winter if you're not using it, and bring it back in the spring when you're ready. So something like that is maybe something to explore and consider further. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And Commissioner Lose.
With regard to the vacant streeteries, I just want to emphasize that we have had some buildings vacant for 2 years with the streetery sitting in front of it vacant. And this is public space. We all pay for it with our taxes. We've got to take good care of it. And they all can look a little bit different, but that's just not acceptable. And that goes back to DDOT doesn't have the resources. And I know they're trying. I like the staff, but it is not fair for a program of this size to not be resourced appropriately. So there's actually no way for someone to take that down. The second thing is there are other needs. I mean, within Georgetown, we don't have a metro, unfortunately. We would love one. We also have a cut in a better bus. Our cut went down significantly, and we had the circulator cut, and we have a growing number of hotel rooms. We have millions more visitors. We have thousands more micro mobility bikes, and they need space as well, right? Because people have to be able to get to Georgetown. So, and some people need cars, just the reality. You need the vehicles to do the loading and unloading. Without a metro, with all this growth and the reliance on other types of vehicles, we do need a plan about how this all kind of fits in. So that's why I highlighted modular. I think the modular approach works until we figure out a better approach. And so I think that is something where the vacant isn't working, and thinking we're going to make this permanent while we have these other transportation needs also does not work. And I would hate to see a replica of spending a lot of tax monies only to rip it up. Like, let's give it to the unhoused. It's not not a good use of our money. So thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Well, again, I want to thank all of our ANC commissioners here. I feel like all of you have come with very constructive feedback. I'm very disappointed that so many of you report back that you do not feel like you've seen the level of engagement in this, because I feel like definitely what I heard today was a lot of commissioners that have been working with their local businesses, working with their residents, want to find solutions that work, as well as really use our public space and envision that civic space in a way that it frustrates me how much we see other cities leading and us not, because we could do more. And Commissioner Ruckauer, you threw out the Plaza Act. I appreciate that. Just one example of, again, legislation we passed here trying to think about how we remake that public space into pedestrianized corridors that work for businesses, for residents. And even with that law, it's only 3 corridors. So it's not changing tons and tons. And even that feels like a hurdle to be able to get done. So we can do a lot better here. But again, all your feedback was great. I appreciate it. Thank you all very much for taking the time out here. Let me turn to our second panel of public witnesses. Again, this is going to be a combination of folks that are here in person as well as those online. So let me ask Colleen Hawkinson, who's the Executive Director of the DC Bid Council, Sean Townsend, the President and CEO of the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington, Eric Heidenberger, Public Witness, Frank Wilson, owner of Prost, Daniel Kramer, Public Witness, Patrice Cleary, Public Witness, Robert Wing, Public Witness, and Luis Val, Public Witness. And give me just a moment while we confirm our folks that are joining online. All right, Colleen Hawkinson, I've got you first, and you're here online. So let me turn to you, and then Sean Townsend will turn to you after that.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Good morning. My name is Colleen Hawkinson, and I am the Executive Director of the DC Bid Council. Thank you, Councilmember Allen, for the opportunity to speak in support of the district's permanent streetery program. The DC Bid Council is a membership association that works with external partners to catalyze and support neighborhoods and a vibrant, inclusive city on behalf of DC's 12 business improvement districts. I do want to start by taking the time to thank the entire DDOT team. They have been dedicated to the process of developing a successful permanent program. Throughout this process, we feel there have been countless opportunities for engagement, and much of the feedback provided to DDOT has been incorporated. The Streetery program, created in 2020 to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic on food establishments, was a success by any number of measures, including social, economic, and safety. Streeters kept untold numbers of businesses afloat during the pandemic. They created a way for friends and neighbors to gather. They helped and continue to help keep employees employed. They generate tax revenue for the district, and they reduce vehicular collisions on many blocks where they exist. The success and popularity of streeteries cannot be overstated. In fact, the support garnered from the temporary program led DDOT to create a permanent program and establish design requirements. Now, with 5 years worth of experience at the end of a public health emergency, it's time to transition to a permanent program that takes into account the social, economic, and safety benefits. One sizable obstacle to the continuation of the Streetery program is the overall cost. The actual fees have far exceeded what businesses anticipated and are able to pay. All told, the cost of permit fees, public space rental fees, site planning costs, and construction costs of the new structures will make streeteries unaffordable. In fact, a streetery located in a typical parking space would cost just under $15,000 and would allow for 5 seats. This doesn't account for streeteries that utilize more than one parking space, which is typical. What would be lost with the disappearance of streeteries is safety, tax revenue, and the activation of public space by people. A few examples. In the Georgetown bid alone, safety has improved along corridors with streeteries. In fact, every single block with a streetery has seen a reduction in vehicular collisions. Streeteries located in the Adams Morgan bid will be reduced from 33 to 3, partially due to the exorbitant cost that is projected. These are just 2 examples of real consequences if businesses are unable to afford the cost associated with the permanent regulations. On a separate and related note, I do want to mention the support for parklets. While different, they are still a part of the activation of public space. The increase of fees here too, with the application of meter fees, would make these areas cost prohibitive to continue as well. Both streeteries and parklets provide for the activation of public space, increased safety from both a vehicular and pedestrian perspective, and more eyes on the street. Business improvement districts are requesting a reconsideration of the exorbitant fees. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. Next, let me turn to Sean Townsend with RAMW.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear and see me?
We can, but it's still morning yet. It's not afternoon yet. We're still in the morning hours.
It feels like it. The Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington thanks you for this opportunity to provide comment at this roundtable about the district streetery program. I'm Sean Townsend, President and CEO of RMW, representing over 1,500 food and hospitality businesses that form the backbone of DC's neighborhood economies. Having helped establish the streetery program as a director of the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture, during the pandemic, I witnessed firsthand how creative policymaking and government interconnectivity can transform crisis into opportunity. What began as an emergency response has matured into an essential component of DC's dining culture. Streeteries are an essential element of our region's dining landscape, generating nearly a quarter of summer revenue. Customers have also signaled outdoor dining as a permanent preference, seeking the vibrant atmosphere that streeteries provide. Today's economic headwinds demand flexibility, not restriction. Our members navigate a local economy like no other. Federal layoffs, tariff-driven cost increases, immigration actions, and the ongoing government shutdown. Against this backdrop, streeteries continue to offer one of the few bright spots, a proven tool for generating additional revenue and creating jobs. But the permanent framework threatens to undermine these benefits through provisions that, while well-intended, could render many streeteries economically unviable and practically unusable. Here's 3 critical adjustments that we hear from our members and recommend for this program. Weather protection above rail height, the prohibition on protective enclosures, including transparent ones above railing height, leave streeteries usable only in perfect weather. Sustainable fee structure, the combination of a $260 permit fee and $20 per square foot annual public space rental fee creates an unsustainable burden. Continuity for proven operators. Restaurants that have successfully operated streeteries for more than 4 years deserve consideration, even if their streeteries are in rush hour or snow removal lanes like Immigrant Food or the Park at 14th. Our recommendations aren't about avoiding regulation, they're about crafting rules that work, guidelines that acknowledge operational realities, and standards that encourage rather than discourage participation. Fees that reflect actual economics rather than theoretical valuations. The district stands at a crossroads with this program. One path leads to a thriving outdoor dining culture that enhances neighborhoods, supports small businesses, and generates public revenue. The other risks creating beautiful regulations for empty spaces. We remain committed to collaborate. Just want to be clear. Our members want to comply, invest, and contribute to streetscape enhancement. We simply ask that the final framework reflect the operational realities of running a small business in challenging times, including many restaurants that never fully recovered from the pandemic and continue to face mounting challenges. Let's ensure that this program builds on success rather than restricting it. Together, we can create regulations that serve operators, diners, and the district's broader goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Townsend. Next, let me turn to Eric Heidenberger. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Councilmember Allen, for hosting this discussion today. My name is Eric Heidenberger, and I'm a partner at Prost Restaurant in Mount Vernon Triangle. The Streetery program has been essential to our restaurant over the last 5 years. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for the program. Our Streetery accounts for 50% of our yearly revenue. In warmer months, it's well over 50% of our sales. Over the last 5 years, we've generated over $300,000 in sales tax revenue just from the Streetery alone. It's no surprise to anyone, but the last several years have been incredibly challenging for our restaurant community. We need to be doing everything we can to support restaurants and our small business owners. The new regulations are extensive and restrictive. There is a fast approaching deadline which prevents sufficient time for businesses to go through this process. It gives the overall impression that the city wants the program to go away completely. Over the summer, we heard from DDOT that there was a potential budget being set aside to help fund the build out of new structures. This ended up not being approved. This is a pivotal opportunity for our local officials to support small businesses without increasing our costs to operate or negatively impacting city budgets. I ask the council to revisit the idea of charging rent for the streeteries. Instead, look at the sales tax revenue that these spaces are generating for the city. It generates income for the business and for our employees. Without the streetery, our sales would decrease by 50%, and we would subsequently have to reduce our staff by half. On a nice weather evening, our customers prefer to sit outside versus inside our establishment. At minimum, pausing the timing of collecting rent will allow businesses to recoup costs associated with new regulations, architectural drawings, permitting, and build-out costs. We operate 6 restaurants in the district, and we've been operating in DC for 40 plus years. 3 of our businesses utilize the Streetery program. We have since broken down 2 of those structures as they are no longer essential to our business. In the case of Prost, the Streetery is incredibly essential to our operations and our future at this space. We understand the need for safety guidelines and general design guidelines. We want these to be seen as an amenity not only to our business, but also to our community. Given the ongoing costs and restrictive occupancy regulations, the math to make this work as a benefit for our business is getting hard to justify. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Next, let me turn to Frank Wilson, also with Prost.
Hello, and thank you for hosting this session today. My name is Frank Wilson. I'm also one of the owners at Prost. I think Prost is definitely an example of a successful part of the Streetery program. I think we've added to the vibrancy of Mount Vernon Triangle, and it has provided additional jobs, as Eric has mentioned, for our staff. And I have a few numbers to share just to kind of show how it's benefiting not only our staff, but the city. So our streetery takes up approximately 4 parking spaces. Just doing some rough back of the envelope math, the city takes in about $40 million a year across 18,000 spaces. You could expect the city to make about $8,800 from those parking spaces over the course of this year. We are on a path to pay the city over $80,000 in just in sales tax alone from the sales directly resulting from having that streetery. Our staff has earned close to $140,000 just through 10 months of the year in just the tipped portion of wages from that streetery. I think a lot of what has been mentioned so far about the kind of confusion around the plans is something that we're experiencing firsthand. We had been waiting for the final rules for some time and had been in communication with DDOT up until this summer. I know there was a little bit of turnover there. And we were hopeful about the program where the architectural fees were potentially going to be supported by the DC government. We had been waiting on that. That did not come through. So then we started our process. We had our first meeting with DDOT in August. We then had to go out and find an architect to do the drawings. The cost of the permit for what's going to be a roughly 400 square foot structure is going to be roughly $12,000 to $15,000 just from the preparation of the documents to submitting the permits. That is a lot of money for a small business like ours. And then to go through that and then have to pay $20 a square foot is a pretty big burden. And it's something where I can understand why a lot of businesses out there are questioning whether or not it makes sense for them to move forward. Thank you for giving us the time today.
Thank you very much, Frank. That's helpful. Next, let me turn to Daniel Kramer.
Hey, good morning. Still morning, Mr. Townsend. Good morning, everybody. Chairman Allen, I'd like to thank you and Councilmember Pinto and the others who are bringing us here to actively address an imperfect situation with the streeteries. And I'd also like to tip my cap to the commissioners who are always donating their time over very long meetings to the betterment of the neighborhoods. Quick background, I'm managing partner at 5 different on-premise restaurant and bars across DC. We're in wards 1, 2, 3, and 8. I think there's a lot of agreement on the panels about job creation and increased tax revenues, other benefits of streetscapes and placemaking, and also that it's been challenging for commissioners, residents, and operators alike to navigate whatever situation the regulations are in. I think one big thing with the one-size-fits-all approach being a problem is that it does not take into account that our neighborhoods are unique and they have their own character, and so does each street within each neighborhood. So the design of the idea of a one-size-fits-all concept was never going to work. We've heard from the ANC chair in Georgetown, which has completely different streetscape, sidewalk width, location of tree planters, street widths than it does for our location on 17th Street or for our location in Navy Yard, which is essentially a new neighborhood, whereas DuPont is 200 years old and Georgetown is 300 years old. So, Mr. Heidenberger, we had a streetery that last year we voluntarily removed. This was at 2000 Pennsylvania Avenue. We have an existing large sidewalk cafe there, The streetery didn't make sense. It's back to parking spaces. Okay, great. They don't work everywhere. At two of our other locations, one of which is on Connecticut Avenue, the other one's on U Street, there has not been and will never be a streetery. On 17th Street, the Dukes there has a beautiful streetery. It's decorated by local artists. It's built by a local minority-owned company. And it would go from 7 tables and 28 seats at current to either 1 table and 4 seats, or 0 and 0, following the existing regulations. That would be devastating to our business there. And because of the existing bike lane that I believe Commissioner Ruckauer from our ANC mentioned, nothing could go there. You could not do parking, you could not do a loading zone, you couldn't do anything. So it would literally go from a productive thing that generates tax revenue, creates jobs, et cetera, to 0. And that would create a situation of 0 winners and everybody loses. And that's just would be kind of destructive public policy. On Half Street in Ward 8 by Nats Park, like that of our neighbors, our streetery is under some pavers that are undergoing some underlying soil and geotechnical issues that are affecting that entire neighborhood. So what's true on 17th Street would not be true there, because they're going to have to rip out the streets and do a whole lot of remediation there with an unknown timetable and solution. The point I'm getting to is that not just does the application process need to be streamlined, and it is good to have basic standards, but my request, besides addressing the astronomical costs that are proposed for this, are that DDOT, that Chairman Allen, that your commission, and that the Public Space Committee have very, very wide and very, very liberal discretion to make exceptions and recognize the case by case, street by street, in the case of 17th Street, not block by block, but half block by half block nature of these streeteries, a lot of which have been operating without issue and to the great benefit of our employees, our neighborhoods, and our guests for 4 years. And I'm grateful to everybody for taking their time. I know everybody's busy, so I will now be quiet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kramer. Patrice Cleary, let me turn to you next.
Thank you for having me today. I represent Purple Patch Restaurant and Joya Burger. 2 of my restaurants are in Mount Pleasant, and 1 is in Glover Park. The 2 in Mount Pleasant have streeteries. Since the pandemic, Purple Patch has grown and evolved alongside our community. The streetery program has not only helped us survive, but it's also allowed us to thrive, rebuild, and employ 65 dedicated team members, many of whom live right there in Mount Pleasant. Our streetery has become a vibrant community space that brings people together, supports neighborhood safety, and sustains the local economy. If we are unable to continue participating in the streetery program under the current compliance timeline, we'd be forced to lay off approximately 40% of our workforce. Currently, we have 65 employees. That would mean laying off 26 employees to go back down to our pre-pandemic numbers of 39 employees. This includes valued servers, bartenders, hosts, bussers, dishwashers, prep cooks, and line cooks, people whose livelihoods depend on this space. Over the years, Purple Patch has demonstrated steady and meaningful growth. Since 2019, our sales have more than doubled, and because of that, we have been responsible for contributing 10% of the sales and use tax revenue back to the city. Last year, our sales were $4 million. That means $438,428 in sales and use tax from 1 restaurant alone was put back into the community. I say this because we are proud to contribute to DC's economic health and provide jobs that sustain local families. However, the process of becoming compliant with the 2025 streetery regulations is both time-consuming and financially challenging, especially during a period when restaurants are still struggling to stabilize. Running a restaurant today comes with a whole new set of challenges, emotionally, mentally, and physically, as we have already seen this year, not only for our owners, but for our employees, many of whom are now fearful and emotionally strained by the uncertainty surrounding the current climate of what is going on in Washington, D.C. While we fully understand and support DDOT's commitment to safety and public space management, we humbly ask that these compliance deadlines be tabled or extended to a later date when we can work together as community partners to create a more balanced and achievable path forward. We are asking for more time, understanding, and collaboration to ensure these goals can be met equitably for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cleary. Let me turn to Robert Wing.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm Rob Wing. And my husband owns Miko, a little tiny restaurant at the corner of our street, on our street at 17th. We have a streetery. It's been a lifeline for us. It got us through the pandemic. It's still a lifeline for us now. We likely would have to close if we have to remove our streetery. Our streetery gives us about 20 seats. We only have 14 seats inside, and we have a few more seats on our terrace, but it really is the difference between being in operation or not. And we've committed a lot of resources to building and maintaining our streetery already. We've estimated that we've put about $30,000 into the streetery already. It works really well, but it does not comply with the guidelines that are currently on the table from DDOT, and we would likely have to remove it if we have to follow those guidelines. And part of the issue is the application process, because it's going to cost a lot of money for us. We're going to have to hire architects. We're going to have to do all the work to put in the application that is really onerous. I think it's between 14 and 17 steps. And just to emphasize, we're a tiny business. We don't have other restaurants we'd like to expand to other restaurants, but and start other restaurants, but we haven't been able to do that yet. And this isn't going to help, because the cost is really going to be prohibitive for us to be able to put in the application. And just to emphasize, the restaurant business, the margins are small. My husband, who owns the restaurant and is the chef, works 7 days a week. He works 10, 15 hours a day. We employ, I think, about 25 people. We'll have to lay off people. And just some examples of the regulations there, the new guidelines, they're inconsistent. For example, for us, we probably have to make it 3 feet shallower to meet the regulations. It's not clear. We have to be 22 feet from a resident entrance, which I'm not sure that we can comply with, because we have a house next door to us. She loves our streetery. She doesn't want it to go away. She will support us having the streetery. But, to meet the 22 feet, I'm not sure that would even allow us to keep the streetery. We're gonna try to apply so that we can keep the current streetery as it is. There's been no safety issues with our streetery. We are very concerned about the rat problem in DC, but we don't want rats underneath our streetery living there. So we work really hard to make sure that they're not. We do that on our own, and we also work with the city to try and get the city to come out and do rat abatement as well. That's a huge issue. We don't want rats there because our customers don't want rats there. I think we're very supported by the neighborhood. The other thing I want to mention is the weatherization. Right now, our streetery, the way that we've built it, we can have people there year round, and that really helps us, especially in the winter months, because we have such small seating inside. So the complying with these requirements what it's likely going to mean is we're not going to be able to maintain the streetery, and that is likely going to mean that, it may mean that we can't continue to operate as a restaurant. The COVID changed the world with respect to the way that we operate. In a lot of ways, there were some silver linings, because we were able to build a streetery, and we were able to, and the city did provide us with some grants that allowed us to restructure our debt. And so there were some positive things about COVID, but what we did is change our whole business model with respect to our little tiny restaurant at Miko. the streetery allowed us to do that. And we really want to, we want to maintain that business model. We think it's a vibrant, I know it's a vibrant restaurant in DuPont Circle. And so really would appreciate consideration of what everyone else has said about the costs, about, the standardization, about the process. Another complication is, the DDOT has said that they're going to allow variances that from the current regulations, but we don't know what process that is. Like, how do you determine what variances are going to be approved or not? And what, it's, we have to go through to the Public Space Committee. I mean, just the resources alone for doing that is going to be really challenging for us. So I think I will stop there. I really appreciate all of you're letting us express our concerns. I really appreciate all of the ANC commissioners for their thoughtful inputs. I just wanted to bring some perspective as a really small business restaurant owner in Washington, and the value of the streetery program, and that we would really like to maintain our streetery to the extent possible as is. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then last on this panel, I've got Luis Vale. Not sure if I mispronounced that.
It's Valle, yeah.
I wasn't even close. All right, Valle, welcome. And let me turn to you now.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen and members of the committee. My name is Luis Valle, and I'm the general manager of Martin's Tavern. I am here to testify about the district streetery program on behalf of our 65 employees. As we all are aware, streeteries started during the pandemic to keep restaurants in business during uncertain and scary times. We thought we were going to have to close our doors for good, and then we were granted a streetery in July of 2020. It saved our then 90-year run. However, streeteries became more than a lifeline. They became the new norm. Streeteries evolved to more than just a place to sit and eat. There's a real life to it. There's ambiance. It's creative activity, street life. It's vibrant, and it supports local businesses beyond restaurants. Furthermore, it creates public safety. Since the installment of our streetery on the corner of Wisconsin and we have seen less automobile accidents and more emphasis on pedestrian safety. Since July of 2020, DDOT has changed the guidelines a few times. We had to buy 2 different size tents when money was tight and income was very low. However, we complied with the regulations and moved forward without any proper guidelines in order to keep our streeteries. The program was on a learning process, and I understand that there was some learning curves and bumps on the road. However, we have learned that streeteries are very popular and people are in favor of it. I see it every day with our guests and regulars that constantly request to sit on the streeteries. Then Initiative 82 happened. It was passed. Streeteries again became a crucial lifeline for restaurants. With the increase of minimum wage, restaurants need extra seating in order to compensate for the extra cost of doing business. Without it, many restaurants will lay off employees or close their doors for good, us included. We need the extra revenue to stay in business. Businesses now have to make a hard decision whether to pay the high cost of streeteries with guidelines that are unclear to most of us, or simply do without and see what happens. We are the nation's capital. Prior to the pandemic, we were the most thriving culinary city in the world. We were getting Michelin-rated restaurants, and well-known chefs were eager to come to the district and open up restaurants. Streeteries provide revenue to the city more than a parking space will ever do. We need to keep them. This one-size-fits-all that DDOT has designed does not work. Each neighborhood is unique in its own way, and that is what makes this city so great. I urge DDOT and the council to revise the guidelines and support small businesses in a more permanent basis. Businesses that will create revenue for the city. Businesses that create a safe social life setting. And these guidelines are regressive for the city and will never help this city's growth. I strongly suggest that you revise these guidelines and let's try to make this city great. Let's do something that's going to be progressive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Valle. I want to note we've been joined by Ward 2 Councilor Brooke Pinto. Councilor Pinto, I'll turn to you in just a moment for a round of questions. And if you wanted to add any opening comment, of course, we can tack on an extra minute or two there as well. Let me thank everybody on this panel for your testimony. Let me just start with where Mr. Valle was speaking, asking this council to change the guidelines. So the council doesn't write these guidelines. This is all coming from the executive and from DDOT. I will say though, we still haven't known 2 more panels, but with just these 2 panels that we've heard from thus far, I am beyond convinced that this cannot take effect at the end of this month. I really think I've heard a lot of constructive feedback of people who want to see standardization, who want to see us really think this through and get it right. But I think from the number of our ANC commissioners and the number of our small businesses, I don't think we're there yet. And I am very anxious that in 3 weeks' time, when these temporary permits expire, we've got a lot of local businesses that'll be on the hook for this. So let me just try to dig in a little bit because I want to make sure we talk this through. So Mr. Heidenberger and Mr. Wilson at Prost, your streetery takes up 4 parking spaces.
Correct.
All right. I'm just going to give you the chance to say this so it's on the record. I mean, obviously, anytime we take away a parking space, someone's going to argue to me, well, hey, that's where a customer could drive their car and come enjoy your space. Is the trade-off of 4 parking spaces worth it to you from your customers, from your workers? Just if you had to do an evaluation, is it worth the 4 parking spaces?
For us as a business, I mean, completely. If you're thinking 4 people are driving those cars and parking, we can serve 100 people with turnover in a single night on our patio and even more. So, and I think that's why Frank looked into those numbers just to justify how much, even just in sales tax revenue, that we're generating in a year compared to what the estimated income is for the parking spaces.
Ms. Cleary at Purple Patch, how many parking spaces does your streetery take up?
So I take up 12 parking spaces. They're in front of the business. What I did early on was I was the first one to jump on the program, the streetery program. I acknowledged the guidelines. I had an architect draw up the drawings according to the original guidelines that were set forth, and then had it constructed. I spoke to the local businesses to the right and left of me, Nido and Pollo Sombroso, who weren't in a position to build a streetery, let alone open at that time to have outdoor seating. And I said, listen, let's be good neighbors. Let me build this out. I'll burden the cost of it. I'll apply for the grants. I'll take on this project. And if you need the space at any time, let us know. And then we'll make space for you so that it's become more of a community space now than just for Purple Patch. Although Nido, the restaurant next door to me, and Pollo Sombrosa are takeout restaurants, and they understand that it's not really service after the sale. They've already made their sale indoors, and now they're just having somebody sit outdoors. Whereas me, those tables are so viable to my bottom line to be able to keep my employees employed. For the current guidelines and regulations, the cost of what it would take for me to just become compliant with narrowing it, because right now I've been paying every 6 months, I pay for long fence, which was approved originally. But to go from long fence to then Jersey barriers, it's going to have to narrow my streetery. So basically the whole streetery is going to have to be cut in half, like in the middle. But just to do that.
Okay, Ms. Cleary,
yes.
My time's ticking down.
Oh,
I
sorry,
want to
go
get a
ahead.
couple more questions, just real fast if you can, that last point.
No, it's just, it's so costly that even for somebody like me that may be able to afford it, Look at all of my other restaurant owners that are friends in Mount Pleasant. I've heard from them. They can't afford this. 1,200 square feet I utilize. That is at $20 a square foot. That's what, $24,000 a year on top of the sales and use tax that I'm already giving back to the city. It's a lot.
It is. It is. Mr. Wing, did I hear you correct that your streetery allows 20 seats, or
Yeah.
was that the total seats?
No, 20. Our seatery right now seats 20 people, and it's actually, well, let me think about this. It's 20 people.
Okay.
And it takes up 2 parking spots.
Okay. And same question I asked, is that trade-off worth it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And
Okay.
we also, I don't think I said this, but we estimate at a conservative estimate that we pay about $1,500 a month in sales tax to the city. So, and it's absolutely worth it. I mean, DuPont Circle parking is hard, but people from the neighborhood come to our restaurant, they walk. People who drive usually are able to find parking, notwithstanding the fact that we take up 2 spaces. So,
I think the answer is gonna be the same for everybody. So I'm gonna kind of keep moving to a couple of questions just with my time ticking down, that you wouldn't be doing it if you didn't think that it was the right trade-off to make. Ms. Hawkinson and Mr. Townsend, I think DDOT is correct in terms of moving towards standardization, of trying to create the idea of permanence. I think that is the right thing to be doing. What I'm hearing, Ms. Hawkinson and Mr. Townsend, in respect of your 2 organizations, is not an objection to the idea of moving towards that standardization, of really bringing in a stronger and more permanent regulatory framework. It's cost, the fees, and the confusion over what this process looks like. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say. We need to not have this take effect at the end of this month, but get some more time, maybe make revisions and changes to the fee structure, to the regulations, but you're not opposed overall, correct? To Ms. Hawkinson and Mr. Townsend? Maybe they both just dropped off.
That's correct.
Okay, there's Mr. Townsend.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My signal's a little off, but yes, that's correct. And then also just some clarity on the guidelines that actually work for restaurants. Like I mentioned, the rail height, not being able to have sides above rail height is problematic for our members, based on feedback that we've heard. This program was designed initially to winterize outdoor space, and with not being allowed to have sides above rail height, I think that will discourage folks from moving forward with the program. But yes, you are correct to answer your question.
Let me ask you that one, because couldn't I flip that argument though and say, by creating a full wall, I'm actually I'm blocking the view of a pedestrian, for example. I'm creating a dangerous situation, or is it that it should be an opaque or a non-opaque kind of material? Like, is that kind of what you're getting at? And actually, Mr. Wing, you got your hand up.
sure, yeah.
That's correct. And sorry, yes, that's correct. We've had this conversation with Director Kirschbaum. I think she's been open and to having the conversation and hearing our feedback. And yes, we have suggested and offered that some type of see-through or transparent film or siding mechanism be allowed, because we do recognize and acknowledge the safety concern.
Right.
Yeah, just to add that, we have right now we have a clear, transparent plastic sheeting that goes from the rail up to the roof, and it's people can see through it. There's not been any incidents. That was super important for us to meet that criteria. We want it to be safe. We don't want safety.
That's again why I think the move towards permanence is a good thing, and creating those standards is a good thing. And I think that's one good example actually of where I am concerned about making sure. And Ms. Hawkinson, I think, had shared on every corridor, the vehicular crash data shows a decrease. So that's positive news, but I also don't want to see one. And so if that's a smart move up for us to make sure that visibility is there, and I think DDOT's pushing us in the right direction there, maybe it's moving to the right type of material, but I do think I do believe the regulation that they're talking about is grounded in safety. And so how we make it work, I think, is just what I'm kind of hearing that feedback.
Can I add that?
Just real fast, and then I know.
Yeah, just real quick.
Time.
So with the initial guidelines, it didn't allow for that. And so we had sheer curtains put up so that you could still see through. If there was a guideline that allowed us to have something opaque, then we would take those sheer curtains down because then it could be truly winterized. But we just put up sheer curtains.
Okay. And
sorry, just
yep,
to add
last
one
comment,
thing.
yeah.
Sorry, yeah, and just the it is really important for us to be able to have people sitting there all year round and in all weather. And the current guidelines don't allow for that. It can only be used in good weather, even if there's a roof, because there can be no sides. People won't be able to sit there in the rain because when there's rain, it's usually wind, and it just won't be a comfortable place to sit. So the ability to be able to have people on the street all year round is really important.
Got it. Okay. I'm at the end of my round, so I'm going to turn to Councilor Pinto for a round of questions, and certainly add on an extra minute or so if you have an opening statement you'd like to add.
Thank you so much, Chairman Allen. And thank you everybody for being here today. It's so nice to see so many of our Ward 2 restaurants on this panel. So great to see you all. I can just hop into it because I've spoken to a lot of our restaurants and operators and residents over the last couple of weeks and months on this issue, but certainly over the last couple of years as well. I think the majority of the streeteries that we have in the city are in Ward 2, and so it's become a very important part of our economy, of our kind of culture. And so really want to understand from some of your perspective as we're in this interim kind of transition period, what that experience has been like. Mr. Kramer, I want to start with you. I know that 17th Street is unique in a lot of ways, but one of the things that was causing me, and I know many of the businesses along 17th Street concern, is that the current guidelines really don't allow for the reality of the situation on 17th Street, like where the crosswalks are located and where the signals are located. And so have there been any other updates of conversations you've had with DDOT to date that give you more confidence that Duke's will be able to operate at Streetery moving forward?
Thanks for the shout out, and thanks for your leadership here, kind of on this issue, CM Pinto. No, I think one of the unfortunate things about a pattern about that you've seen from across the ANCs and the businesses is a lot of not much of anything back from DDOT in terms of guidance. And in the face of that, the directive we've had is just submit your application, and then we'll see. My friend and fellow operator on 17th Street up the street, Georgia at Annie's Steakhouse, has and among others, we have the same kind of frustration. And then what is the next question? Because we're gonna, and I think Rob at Miko also mentioned this as well. It's like, and was it Frank or Eric mentioned it costs a ton of money in terms of architects and consultants to submit these applications in the first place, and without kind of a framework of what to even ask for or what might be permitted or who we're asking those variances from. It's just we're just kind of like in a big unknown zone that again does not take into account what has worked and what does make sense. Because the things that don't make sense, Eric mentioned it, and we've done the same thing. We'll get rid of them ourselves. Where a lot of restaurant operators are basically pure pragmatists. If it works and makes sense, we will keep it. We will try to do it. And if it doesn't, it'll already be gone. We won't do it. It's like just as simple as having like something on your menu that nobody buys. We're not going to keep it there just for, filling space.
Right.
So in the absence of clarity, which it doesn't sound like we're going to get from DDOT, let alone, a response of any kind. That's why I'm saying, I don't know exactly the bureaucratic way this shakes out, but whoever is the decision maker, whether it's your committee here or whether it's DDOT or whether it's the Public Space Committee, whoever that is should have a very, very, very wide berth to say, okay, here are the regulations, but the reality and the facts on the ground of each neighborhood and each street are different, such that we have a lot of berth to grant variances and exceptions.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you very much for that
Thank
perspective.
you.
And it kind of leads me to another question, and maybe Mr. Townsend, you can weigh in here. Like there's, on one hand, I'm really worried about the cost and the fines associated here because it seems like there's not much standardization or consistency, and that it's going to be hard to follow what the uh, rationale and metrics are for all of those fines if someone's not in compliance. And so that would weigh to me on the standard of consistency is beneficial. But then on the other hand, every street is different, every neighborhood is different. Like there are some benefits when it comes to the decisions themselves of having that type of wider perspective so that all those considerations can be made of what may work well on one street may be a different outcome for another. And so as we try to urge DDOT to make some of those changes, what is the Restaurant Association's perspective on getting that balance of consistency for fairness, but flexibility for reality?
Flexibility for reality.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's a fair point, and we acknowledge that there needs to be, fairness in this process and in the regulations. We also, I've heard, I think someone testified to it earlier. There are some streeteries out there that just don't need to be up. And there needs to be something in place that acknowledges that. And I think a fine structure would address those streeteries. But here today, we have folks who are fully engaged, want to be in compliance, and want to utilize this streetery in the way that the program was created for. And so I think that there's an opportunity here to strike that balance.
Okay, thank you. And then Eric, and is that Luis on here from Martin's? Can you both speak to the process you've engaged in to date? Like, have you applied for the exception? What has the response and communication been so
Yeah.
far?
So when the guidelines were first released early in the summer, we got on one of the Zoom calls to go over the guidelines with someone from DDOT, and we got kind of some feedback that there might be a budget for helping pay for architectural drawings. There might be an architect that is provided from the city to help us with these plans. We found out that budget wasn't allocated. There was a period to submit like rebuttal to some of the guidelines. And I know a lot of bids, restaurants had submitted some changes that we were looking for and didn't hear back. And it looks like none of the guidelines have been amended for that. We got on another call in August to go over the guidelines again. And it turned out the person that we had been corresponding with was no longer with DDOT. And then these guidelines were set in place, and November 30th was going to be the deadline. So we started to scramble really quick starting in September. We had to reach out to an architect, get stamped drawings. We went through a PDRM, like a preliminary design review meeting, and got some feedback because one of the guidelines is you have to have a 25-foot abatement from a curb cut, like a alleyway. We're in a unique situation because it's actually like a staffing lot and a garbage lot. So there's only like 5 or 6 cars that park back in there. It's not a throughway, it's not an actual alley. So we went through the PDRM to ask if like we could have an exception for the curb cut because 25 feet would cut half of our streetery from where it is now, and it would make it not realistic whatsoever. So they gave us some guidelines for there. We've submitted for our permit. We submitted them 2 days ago, but you have to go through a public space hearing. And what we're hearing is those are like 2 to 3 months out. So even though our application is in for permit, we may not get an answer or go in front of a public space hearing, which could then kick us back to starting all over again. So the November 30th deadline is like, it seems just unattainable, even from like how DDOT's operations are and just their bandwidth of being able to handle all these applications.
And I think that was one of the reasons it was such an important change, to make sure that the fines aren't instituted until determination is made,
Yeah.
because it can't be a DDOT delay, and not even necessarily like problematic delay, just a delay because of all of the volume. And so that's now clarified on their website. And Luis, I'm over time. Can you just confirm that you have applied for a?
We did have applied, and again, we also had talked to people in DDOT, and the person that I think we were talking to the same person, Eric, because that person was no longer there, and we had to restart all over. So.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that context. Thank you very much, Chairman Allen. Sorry to be over time, but look forward to working with you and others on these important issues to get this right. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Counselor. Appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody for their testimony and their feedback on this panel. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to move to our third panel, but I might just combine our third and our fourth just from a timing perspective here. So let me see. I've got John Gugamos, who's the chair of the DC Nightlife Council, who's here in person. Kristen Barden, who's the executive director of the Adams Morgan Partnership BID, who I think is joining us online. John Wybenson, Vice President of Operations of the Georgetown BID in person. Amy Titus, Board President of the Citizens Association of Georgetown. Matthias Paustian, who's a public witness. Ezra Deutsch-Feldman, who's a public witness. David Alpert, public witness. And Dennis Sendros, public witness. All right, I think I've got everybody here. And John, I called you first, and you're right here. So as we bring everybody else into the Zoom, I'll let you go ahead and get started for us. Good afternoon. Not afternoon yet. Good morning.
Good morning, Councilmember Allen and Pinto and the committee staff. My name is John Guggenmost, a small business owner and chair of the DC Nightlife Council. And for a couple of years, we were told that the permanent rules and standards would be coming and that the public space rent would be consistent with the outdoor dining framework. But what was published isn't consistent. It's a complete departure. The unenclosed sidewalk cafe rent in DC is $5 per square foot. The enclosed cafe rate is $10 per square foot. The streetery rate is $20 per square foot, 4 times the unenclosed and double the enclosed. If you look at the numbers, they tell the story. In Logan Circle, a 400 square foot streetery would cost $8,000 a year in rent. That's 400% more than what an unenclosed sidewalk cafe pays. And in comparison, in Soho, in New York, one of the most expensive restaurant districts in America, their roadway dining rents are about $25 to $26 per square foot. It's easy to say that DC isn't Soho. We don't have the density, the tourism, or the traffic to support Soho rates, yet that's what's being assessed. If the goal was to eliminate streeteries, DDOT could have done that easily. Instead, they've created a process so expensive that elimination becomes the outcome, not by the rule, but by the math. We've all heard the rules were coming for years, but the part that really defies logic was that in public meetings, we were told before the rules were passed that if you weren't in compliance, you needed to start bringing your streeteries into compliance. So think about that for a minute. How do you comply with rules that aren't approved yet? How do you redesign, rebuild structures for standards that haven't been finalized? And when the final rules did arrive, I think the preliminary are recorded, they came with a November 30th deadline that's just simply impossible to meet. We were caught off guard by how the proposed rules were finalized. Most of us assumed that the council would vote on rates because taxes, fees, fines are exclusively left to the council. But what happened instead was a passive approval, a 45-day window that has expired without action, allowing DDOT to codify the rate. So how can a business make a decision on investment when they're not even sure what the public space rent was going to be? So I want to be clear, I'm not against rules. I'm not against standards. In fact, I love design standards. I'm very proud of what we did at number 9. But during COVID, when we tried to get guidance from DCRA, there was none. And at no fault, because we were all dealing with what was going on with COVID, we followed the standards from Seattle. We're ADA compliant, we had proper drainage, the same rail height, and we used the same environmental standards as Seattle and even added green elements. But with the new regs, we aren't fully modular. We have planters that wouldn't comply to be moved. And so we've started the process and we're lucky. We're $7,500 into architectural fees engineering to get the permit. I sent Eric and Councilmember Allen's office my budget, and for us to expand just a little bit to encompass a little more of Stony Street front, which they're allowing us to do, my budget is over $50,000. I'm all for structures, but an implementation timeline, it's setting up reasonable businesses to fail. So I know I sound negative, but I want to call it what it is. An unrealistic fee schedule, an impossible implementation schedule will wipe out all of the neighborhood streeteries by spring. I've talked to the other business owners in Logan Circle, and even Le Diplomat, who has the volume to comply, is going to give up their streetery. I'm going to be the only one left in Logan Circle. So it just makes me question what the goal was. If DDOT's goal was to restore control, or just to remove their streeteries, this could have been done much more directly. But if the goal is to preserve a cafe culture, to support small businesses, to make our public spaces more vibrant, then this policy and the implementation misses by miles. I'm asking the council for two things. First, a delay of enforcement by at least 90 days to get operators a chance to study and to look at compliance. And second, to revisit the $20 per square foot and change the fees to the $5 on enclosed sidewalk cafe rate, because it's just not the public space rent. We have $300 a year in our ABCA streetery endorsement, and I'm estimating what a certificate of use will cost. We're about another $800 a year in fees. Outdoor dining helped transform the city. It brings people together. It gives us a sense of community. It makes our streets safer, more live, more vibrant. And we shouldn't lose this program with really an arbitrary deadline for compliance and a straight structure that's built for Fifth Avenue instead of 14th Street. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to any other attention this deserves.
Thank you very much. Next, let me turn to Kristen Barden with the Adams Morgan bid, who is joining us online.
Hi, good morning. I apologize for my my voice. I'm still recovering from our terrific Adams Morgan Porch Fest that we had on Saturday, and I lost my voice, so it's coming back. So apologies for that. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm the executive director of the Adams Morgan Partnership Bid. And in my role here for the last 16 years in my life in DC since 1994, I've been a supporter of small businesses and vibrant public spaces. I'm here because the once successful program, the Streetery Initiative, has been regulated to death. What began as a lifeline for restaurants during the pandemic and a celebrated tool for activating our streets has been smothered by excessive requirements from DDOT. Let's be clear, the problem is not the concept. The streeteries worked. They saved jobs, they animated our streets, they brought life to corridors that desperately needed it, and made DC the world-class city that we are. Cities from New York to San Francisco have embraced these outdoor spaces, long-term, right? And we've heard testimony about that already. Today, streeteries have evolved beyond a stopgap to become central to the district's hospitality economy. Their success has transformed our streets into dining destinations, creating jobs and generating revenue. Their continued popularity with residents and visitors demonstrates the public's continued preference for outdoor dining options. Meanwhile, in DC, we seem determined to make them so complicated, expensive, and bureaucratic that only a handful will probably survive. So the problems are, the new permanent regulations, right, which we've already kind of talked to death, that make streeteries only usable in perfect weather. Without the ability to protect diners from rain, cold, and summer heat, most streeteries will sit empty except in ideal conditions, undermining the district's goal of maximizing public spaces. DC already recognized weather protection is essential for their success, having previously spent $4 million in winterizing streeteries. That was in the early days of the pandemic. And Then, of course, the excessive permitting fees and costly design costs. The early program charged no rental fee for use of the parking lane space. Under the permanent program, restaurants will be required to pay the public space rental fee of $20 per square foot, which we've heard a lot about. In addition to the rental fee, the site planning services and other permits bring the total cost to at least $13,000 per streetery we've estimated for Adams Morgan. And I have a table on the last page of my testimony that demonstrates all of those costs. Here in Adams Morgan, we hosted the pilot project with DDOT to demonstrate the permanent regulations. And we had 33 restaurants that participated in that pilot. We surveyed all of those businesses this summer, and only 3 of the 33 were interested in continuing with the program. Mostly because of the cost burden and the inability to enclose them to keep heat in and make them usable throughout the winter. So now DDOT, we're working with DDOT now to remove all of the pilot project streeteries, all of the platforms and railings and overhead structures. That process is going to begin in mid-December to dismantle the pilot. And then those businesses, the couple that, were interested in continuing, they're going to have to decide in the spring whether or not to rebuild and, what they're going to do. But as others have mentioned as well, these fees come at a time when many small businesses are still recovering from the pandemic losses and inflationary pressures, and of course, the National Guard and everything that's happened since August. So what to do? And here's what I'd like the council and DDOT to consider. Allowing protective enclosures to shield both diners and the streetery from weather and from vandalism. The other thing that we've heard from our small businesses is that without the ability to kind of control the space, overnight, there's all kinds of other activity that happens in the streetery space, to which in the morning, then they have to sometimes escort people out of the space and then clean up after them. So if there's not a way to enclose it when the business is closed, then like anything can happen, right? So that's kind of a problem. Establish fees that reflect the substantial investments that operators are making to transform these spaces into vibrant dining areas. Direct DDOT to phase in these new rental fees, as others have suggested, or do a waiver for some period of time. Create a streamlined, affordable permitting path for small businesses with a capped rental fee or freeze during perhaps the first 3 to 5 years of the permanent program. Establish clear timelines and accountability for DDOT review, so businesses are not waiting months in limbo with costs accruing. And then monitoring and reporting annually how the streetery program is doing, right? How many businesses participate, how many leave, what the fee burden is, and how this affects a neighborhood commercial vitality. At a time when storefront vacancies are rising and downtown is still struggling to recover, we should be making this easier, not harder, for people to dine outside, gather, and enjoy public space in DC. Streeteries should be a part of our future, but unless council acts, DDOT's current fee and regulatory structure will eliminate them by attrition. Let's choose vibrancy over red tape. Let's support the small businesses that make our neighborhoods thrive. Let's bring back the welcoming street life that helped carry our city through the toughest days of the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barton. Next, let me turn to John Wybenson from the Georgetown.
Good morning. Yep, John Wybenson. So, good morning, Councilmember Allen, Councilmember Pinto, members of the committee. My name is John Wybenson, the Vice President of Operations for the Georgetown BID. Today, I'll be providing testimony on the district streetery program. Well, the streetery program started as a way to keep restaurants in business during the pandemic. It has evolved and become a transformative for Georgetown's commercial district, street life, and safety. This is important because Georgetown is the city's premier retail destination, needs to remain strong and vital, especially during these uncertain times. To date, the streetery program has had a positive economic and safety impact in Georgetown. Notably, street traffic crashes on both M Street and Wisconsin Avenue have dropped by almost 50% since installation. Outdoor dining continues to help many restaurant operators stay in business. Further, the presence of streeteries has drawn more pedestrian activity to the neighborhood, created more vibrant street life, and fueled leasing activity across all retail sectors. I want to offer a few detailed points. First of all, streeteries and parklets make our streets safer and more vibrant. Every block with a streetery has seen reduced vehicle collisions, some up to 60%. Outdoor dining adds activity to the streets, provides places to dwell and enjoy our historic district, and creates a desirable experience that complements our shopping. Second, streeteries pay for Georgetown and DC. The opportunity for outdoor dining with restaurants leasing by expanding dining options and increased potential occupancy. They bring valuable tax revenue to the district, and many businesses appreciate that streeteries provide diverse options for both shoppers and diners. However, there are a lot of challenges that come along with streeteries. One of the costs has been mentioned. After the cost of getting engineered plans, securing materials, and maintaining required items, the annual fee is burdensome to restaurants, even though the entire community benefits from the results. Some Georgetown restaurants are not proceeding with existing streeteries due to cost concerns. Secondly, the guidelines are too restricted. They do not take into account Georgetown's historic streetscape and character, and sometimes fail to accomplish the key economic development goals. The bid crash data shows streeteries have made each block safe for 5 years, and yet existing streeteries will be denied by DDOT for safety reasons. Once the streeteries are removed, the streets will be less safe, commercial vibrancy will decline across the neighborhood, which will impact the city and Georgetown negatively. Finally, a few more stats. Almost half the restaurants of our existing streeteries in Georgetown are not pursuing future streeteries due to costs and prohibitive guidelines. Given the economic impact the streeteries have had in the Georgetown and the neighborhood, really, the bid finds this troubling. Because of Georgetown's unique character and historic uniqueness, Georgetown streetery applicants are consistent with the guidelines, which means almost all streetery permits would have to go through the special review consideration involving the Public Space Committee. The bid has been assisting these restaurants and providing application support, which is essential for many of the restaurants. While we are happy to provide the support, it has been a heavy lift for the staff to facilitate and advocate for our businesses. We remain extremely optimistic about the future of the program and the potential economic can have for Georgetown and the city. We really thank you for the opportunity to provide comments and look forward to answering questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Next, let me turn to Amy Titus, who's joining us online. Ms. Titus, are you there?
I am.
Good morning, and I'll turn to you now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Allen, members of the committee, and Council Member Brooke Pinto, and thank you for this opportunity to be able to testify. I'm the board president of the Citizens Association of Georgetown, and we represent residents on issues such as safety, rats and trash, and historic preservation, which is our #1 priority. I want to make it very clear that we absolutely support outdoor dining when it is historically appropriate, sanitary, and maintained, which it has not consistently been to date. But I think, as you all heard from John Wiedemann from the Georgetown bid, Georgetown is unique. So we all know that COVID was an unprecedented situation, and the streeteries came up, and it was a great idea for the time, but it's over. So now we're all going through a long process, and we've heard that the process is confusing. I think every testimony practically has said that from multiple stakeholders. Our concern is that today's streeteries do not meet current guidelines, and 90% of them are requesting exceptions with the process. So I think we need to look at the viability of this process. But today, our concerns with streeteries are they sit on crosswalks, they block traffic, causing safety issues. You hear many others saying they don't, but they do in certain cases. They're inches or feet away from crosswalks, driveways, and alleys. They sit in the middle of busy intersections. And I talked about the maintenance, which hasn't been there. We have problems with the rats. We have trash. And some are used as public seating or to store furniture. So we really ask that this be looked at and be able to be managed. And our other question is, when did Jersey barriers get to be a fixture in this process? If you think of Georgetown and its historic value and its look that is so important, Jersey barriers really destroy that look. We also support requiring application renewal cycles, like every other similar DC program. We agree that there should be fees. I think everybody has said that there should be, but they need to reflect a realistic cost for using public space. And as Council Member Brooke Pinto said, one size does not fit all. We really need to look at what needs are and understand these as we move forward. finally, I want to say we're fully aligned and support the ANC 2E resolution on streeteries. And you heard from Glenn Losey this earlier today. Listening today, we've heard a lot of concerns. How have we learned over the 5 years around this unprecedented, incredible pilot? There's many positive aspects that we've also heard, but we also need to rethink it, this approach for streeteries, particularly in historic districts. And lastly, as we think about the streeteries in a broader context, how will the use of the street with streeteries dovetail with the rapid bus lines that we are all dependent on for transportation? We don't have information on how these will fit together. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And I finish with that last point.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Titus. Next, let me turn to Matthias Paustian.
Good morning. Let me know if you cannot hear me. On occasion, I have problems with the software. Great, thank you. My name is Matthias Paustian. I live in Ward 4. I speak today in strong opposition of these additional regulations on streeteries. I have 4 points to make: cost, timing, equal treatment, and culture. Cost, from what we've heard, these are very significant additional costs on the restaurant industry, and this is not the time to do that. Timing is exactly the issue that I think many restaurants and businesses are struggling. Right now is not the time to make those changes. And I am concerned with equal treatment. The administration or the government, DC government, says that DC is open for business. And yet here we are making business harder, especially for small businesses. I see a lot of work being done of making life easy for big businesses. Look what was done for the Commanders. Look what was done for Monumental. Here we are and have a whole bunch of small businesses who are contributing a lot, and we're making their life harder, a lot harder. And from a personal perspective, culture. I think these streeteries are a really important feature of a kind of culture that embraces the public more, where people go out and do things in public instead of in their homes or inside a building. And I personally really enjoy that. I think for families, sometimes it's really good to sit out in streeteries where, kids can sometimes even walk up and walk around, in between the first and second course of dinner, stuff like that. So we personally, as a family, enjoy streeteries a lot, and I think they should be maintained. My recommendation is that DDOT really needs to go back to square one. This is not ready to be rolled out at all. I think the regulations should be removed. They should focus on a key number of deliverables: safety, sanitation standards, perhaps. Everything else is really not needed. That completes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paustian. Next, let me turn to Ezra Deutsch-Feldman. Good afternoon. Yep, you just push the button, the red light.
My
comes
first
up.
time here
There
in
we go.
person. Hello, DC Council. I live in Adams Morgan. I'm right around the corner from 18th Street and all the streeteries. And I just wanted to provide my perspective simply as a member of the community. I'm not affiliated with any restaurants or the BID or anything like that. But over the last few years, the streeteries have greatly increased the quality of life in Adams Morgan and on 18th Street. It's just plain nicer to walk down the street and see people outdoors enjoying a meal, enjoying coffee, as compared to what was there before, which was rows of parked cars. More people out and about in the neighborhood increases the sense of community, it increases the vibrancy, it increases the neighborliness. My worry is that if the streeteries were to be removed, either due to the fees, either the overly strict regulations, or just the uncertainty that you've seen so many people talk about today, that if those streeteries were removed, the space that they take up will just revert to private car parking, which so often just becomes the default for curb space if there's nothing else there. And we've actually already seen that exact pattern happen on my block of Lanier Place when Tail Up Goat shrunk its outdoor dining space from roughly the space of 4 cars to the space of 2 cars, and that space just went back to 2-car parking. But what we've learned, you mentioned that it's very hard to take parking spaces away, but in this case, they've already been taken away. The question is, should they go back? And what I think we've learned over the last few years in Adams Morgan is we do not need those parking spaces back. We are doing extremely well. The The Porch Fest this weekend was, enormous. There were a ton of people there. So, what the city builds for is what the city is going to get, whether that's parking spaces for cars or whether that is space for people who want to stop, sit down, relax, and have a meal. There are two exceptions that I think are important, which would be disabled parking as well as commercial loading and unloading. I think those do have a place on the curb on 18th Street. But other than that, what's important for me is that the space be put to its best possible use for the public. That could be outdoor dining, similar to what it is now. It could be wider sidewalks with public chairs and picnic tables. It could be more street trees and mini parks. It could be bike and scooter parking, or maybe there would even be room to add a dedicated bus lane so that people without a car can get to and from Adams Morgan more easily and more quickly. Most likely, the best use of 18th Street would be a combination of all of these. So it's very hard to change our thinking from the default car parking. And it takes a lot of proactive work to imagine something new and better for the space. But I hope that the council and that DDOT are ready to do that work so that we can keep Adams Morgan and keep our neighborhoods in DC moving forward to a healthier, more sustainable, more pleasant, and less car-centric future. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Next, let me turn to David Alpert, who I think is joining us online. Mr. Alpert.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Allen Pinto and members of the committee. My name is David Alpert, this is right, and I live on 1 block from 17th Street in DuPont Circle. The streeteries have been wonderful for 17th Street. Am I sideways? Sorry. The streets have been really wonderful for 17th Street. When they were actually briefly gone for repaving, the street became so much less pleasant to walk my children along. These are also, with very few exceptions, totally fine the way they are, and there is not an urgent need to make drastic changes. These regulations seem to view the streeteries as a nuisance to be at best tolerated, subject to very ponderous exception processes that are expensive and cumbersome. Sadly, it's likely that these streeteries could never have been created absent the pandemic with the way we do regulation in the district. It reminds me of the corner store zoning proposals that was enacted during the zoning update of the 2010s. Enormous amount of effort went into creating rules for corner stores, and yet few, if any, ever got established because the rules were so restrictive. And then the existing ones were actually already grandfathered. What if we empower the ANCs more here? Look at all the work that they put in on this process, and they weren't engaged by DDOT. Their comments, as we saw in this hearing, are often more thoughtful, and at least they're more appropriate for each neighborhood, whether it's Georgetown, DuPont, U Street, Cleveland Park, or Mount Pleasant. And these are elected officials. Our ANCs usually only have the opportunity to say no, to raise concerns, or obstruct. Why don't we give them a chance to be more of an agent of yes? We do have a small number of streeteries with minor issues. There's one on 17th that is too close to the crosswalk, and that is dangerous. And there are also drainage issues. But our ANC knows about these, and members have spoken about these factors. Perhaps DDOT was so restrictive because it was thinking of them as something that would be absolutely permanent to stand the test of time. Is that necessary? What's wrong with a setup where they can be somewhat temporary structures? Couldn't we allow them, as long as they meet safety, accessibility, and drainage, but preserve the expectation that maybe in the future there would be a bus priority project or something like that, and there would be a requirement to remove them? And can we treat existing ones differently from perhaps proposals to establish wholly new ones that don't exist at all right now? I would lean against standardization, except as absolutely necessary. The buildings aren't identical, so why do the streeteries need to be? And they are working now. The sidewalk widths, tree locations, and so on vary from neighborhood to neighborhood. I think Georgetown's are actually overly uniform, but that can be a decision that they make, and we can make a different one. I don't live there. I live in DuPont instead, and we can make a different choice. Again, maybe that's an opportunity for the ANCs, since they are, again, elected officials who can represent their neighborhoods. So to summarize, I would recommend that this program be changed to drastically reduce the fees, reduce the burden of regulations, make it much easier to get flexibility without a long and expensive process, especially for existing streeteries. Empower the ANCs to say yes and speed up the process when the community is supportive, and set up a longer-term, semi-temporary pathway. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albert. And next, let me turn to Dennis Sindros, who's joining us online.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Councilmember Allen and
members of the commission. I want to say I live in Columbia Heights. I'm a car owner here. And so the elimination of parking affects me directly. And I want to send the clear message that it's perfectly fine. I have not really experienced any negative effects from the elimination of parking in my neighborhood. And there has been some. On 11th Street, there's a number of streeteries that serve the neighborhood really, really well along 101 Ballroom, further up the street, what used to be McCon, Johnny's. There's a number of restaurants right along 11th Street that are better off because they're able to build streeteries. And the sense of community they bring is positive. I haven't heard a single person in my neighborhood complain about these. And I'm confident that if I were to talk to people about how they were possibly about to go away because of overly restrictive rules that DDOT was putting in place, that they would be really concerned about that. These are valuable public amenities. To the extent that cost is driving restaurants to say that they would need to get rid of the streeteries, I think those costs should be reduced. It doesn't make sense to try to recoup as much from the curb space as we do with parking, because this is actually a public amenity that benefits a lot of people in the neighborhood. It's okay to recoup a little less. To the extent that it's onerous regulations, I think we've heard some very valid reasons, reasons to try to standardize these streeteries, the daylighting, the ADA concerns. These should all definitely be dealt with, but I think those minimum standards can probably be dealt with in a much less onerous way than what DDOT has proposed. And so I urge the committee to do everything it can to make streeteries available to as many restaurants as possible and as many, importantly, DC residents as possible, so that we can continue to use them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And then our final public witness, I have Ann Blackwell, who's the Executive Director of the DuPont Circle Main Street. You can push the button so the red light comes on. There we go.
Good afternoon. I was at home. I had already submitted a written testimony and was inspired to put on a suit, put up my hair, and come down and speak in person. I'm going to read my testimony, though. My name is Ann Blackwell, and I support the broadening and publicizing of the appeal process for the existing streetery guidelines. I'm the Executive Director of Historic DuPont Circle Main Streets. I represent one of 28 nonprofits in this city that are annually awarded Main Street grant money. Thank you, DC Council members. By the DC Department of Small and Local Business Development for economic development in our city. Historic DuPont Circle Main Street is the only main street in this city with historic in its name. We are not only architecturally historic, but we have the highest concentration of legacy businesses in the city. These are 50 small and local businesses that have been in DuPont Circle for over 20 years. Of DuPont Circle's 300 plus businesses, over 50 businesses are legacy and defined by the DC Preservation League. Ironically, these two related factors, historic architecture and the largest cluster of long-standing business owners, create our reason for a request for a broad and publicized appeal process to the existing or proposed streetery guidelines. My request is that the streetery guidelines created by the District of Columbia Department of Transportation work in conjunction with the same streetscapes that DDOT installed in our historic commercial corridors. Or that historic commercial corridors are exempt from these guidelines altogether. We are thankful that DDOT and the DC government are open to revising the streetery guideline enforcement during this very crucial economic time, that a collaboration could create a very successful program, but the guidelines as they exist now do not. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Blackwell, and good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
All right, let me jump in with a couple of questions. If I can, Ms. Barton, I wanted to follow up with you a little bit to make sure I could understand what you were talking about related to the Adams Morgan streeteries. So can you walk me through what took place there so I understand this? So if I followed you correctly, but please correct me if I'm wrong. The individual businesses built out streeteries. They're then at their cost.
Right.
They then had to remove those streeteries at their cost. Then the city.
No,
well,
the
then
city,
okay.
the city removed them. So just about a year ago, when the pilot project started, DPW and DDOT removed the structures that each of the businesses had built. So they did not have to pay for
Okay,
that.
thank you for clarifying that. All right, so they paid to build them, but then as part of the pilot program, which was approximately $750,000, the city removed the streeteries that existed, put in new streeteries as part of the pilot program, and then the city is now planning to remove them at their cost, or the
Correct,
business cost.
at the city's cost.
Okay, and then the business will have to choose if they want to, at their cost, rebuild.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, so the business didn't pay 3 times, but they would be paying twice to build a streetery.
That's right.
All right. And we spent $750,000. And how long were those streeteries up?
They've been up for just a little more than a year.
Okay.
The project was completed in September 2024.
All right. But we're about to take those back down.
In December.
So from a small business perspective, having to build these twice, not 3 times, but twice, that feels like a pretty significant burden for them to have to absorb. And then on top of that, what I think has been a common theme that we've heard throughout the day today, a lot of small businesses are looking at the fees and costs associated, in addition to just the actual construction of the thing,
Right.
will be quite onerous.
Right. Yeah. And, let's not forget the engineering and the architectural drawings, like that's thousands of dollars probably. And John Gugamos, mentioned some of his expenses.
Yes. Yeah. So Mr. Gugamos, I know you and I've talked about this before, and you'd shared as you talked about some of the costs associated with it. What would a delay in enforcement? Is a delay in enforcement alone what you think would help address this? Or I hear you saying, and I think I've kind of heard this consistently through the day, there also need to be changes to the actual guidelines as well. A delay may give some space to make some changes, but it's not just a delay for the sake of coming into compliance. It's a delay with changes to the guidelines.
Yes. And again, we don't want to compromise safety.
Correct.
But currently, I went to the website to look, and as long as you've applied, so in my case, $7,500 in architectural fees to be able to submit the plans to TOPS, then you will not have to tear it down by November 30th. But that assumes that someone's taken on that cost. And there are exceptions that just need to be looked at and reviewed. So there can be a safety standard, but that's just going to take months. So I was thinking we just needed to set any of that action aside, because you can't expect a business to pay $10,000 just to find out, it's really not doable. Exceptions aren't going to be allowed.
Well, on top of that, let's use the sides as an example. We heard in the panel that we just had a moment ago, they talked about the difference between an open side versus a clear side of where they could operate in the winter. That means you've also got to make staffing decisions. So if you're not going to be able to operate in the winter, you're going to staff appropriately, maybe make changes if you are going to, but those aren't decisions you just make on a Thursday for the weekend service. Those are plans you've got to lay out a little bit more in advance, right?
Oh, absolutely. And for number 9, we know that we'll have to lay off 2 people. And that's just the reality of it.
Yeah. Okay. And on safety, this was brought up at a previous panel as well, but Mr. Weavenson, did I hear you say that roadway stretches with streeteries in Georgetown experienced a 50% reduction in traffic collisions.
Yeah, no, they've been super impactful, just basically creating a road diet, forcing everyone
Yeah.
to slow down. And so, Wisconsin have seen significant drops. There were some statements of middle of the pandemic, road traffic was down, volumes were back up, and the numbers are staying the same.
And that's good to hear.
Yep.
And appreciate that data. Again, I do think that the premise that DDOT's regulations were coming to around the sides, for example, was one rooted in safety. But I also think maybe there's a way we can address both those safety issues for pedestrians coming around with design, but also the streeteries themselves have actually led to safer conditions.
Yeah, like we don't have any sides on any of ours. We've kind of adopted some of the requests from our community partners and OGB, and we don't have any roof structures other than early on when we had tents during the early years of the pandemic.
Okay.
And that's been still just really reducing the amount of speeding traffic through Georgetown.
To our bids and main streets that are here, could you talk a little bit more about your engagement during the streetery, the most recent streetery process? We heard on the first panel, for example, we heard the ANCs, they expressed some frustration. They talked about they had set resolutions. They felt like they were trying to engage and provide recommendations. And they didn't feel a lot of engagement. From our bids and main streets, can you talk through what your engagement was? Maybe I'll start here, Ms. Blackwell, and then Ms. Barden after that.
So our engagement has been really pretty strong with DDOT. We started this process with our initial permits back in 2020. There have been regular conversations with DDOT staff. I mean, Kim and Kelsey, who have been here, have been great partners throughout the process and continue to be. We've explored other ways to eliminate streeteries and do a permanent sort of extended sidewalk program. We know funds have been limited, so it's been kind of paused, but I will say they've been a really good partner for us with regular conversations and trying to be creative through this whole process.
Okay. And Ms. Blackwell? Yeah, obviously, and you're representing from Main Street, not a bid perspective, but curious.
Different perspective. And of course, DuPont Circle right now is speaking with DDOT on a regular basis because we have the Deco project going on right now. So we have construction on Connecticut Avenue. And I will say that our ANC has been in dialogue with DDOT. Our business owners have expressed concern. And I believe we have passed on our concerns to Councilmember Pinto's office, who has also passed on those concerns. I will say that DDOT has been receptive, but that we don't see, we did not understand that there was going to be any delay in enforcement of the deadline.
Okay. All right. And Ms. Barden?
Yeah, DDOT, we've worked really closely with DDOT. I mean, since the streetery program started in June 2020, through the various iterations, and especially during the pilot project, we worked really closely with them. And we continued, to work closely with Sharon and the whole team. I think, that's part of it. But in terms of like the development of the permanent regulations, we testified in every hearing that we had an opportunity to, and, in the development of the permanent regs, I don't feel like DDOT listened to all of the feedback that they were getting. And that, that process, I think has not gone well. But in terms of their communication with us around the pilot, that's worked well.
Okay. All right. That's helpful to hear. And then, this again has been a consistent theme that's come up in all of our witnesses. Mr. Gugamos, you talked about the costs and that the cost per square foot compared to Soho. And I think we heard pretty consistently from a lot of folks that the costs just seem like too high and out of line. And it's also, what is it we're attempting to do with that higher fee? Are we trying to offset parking meter revenue? Is that the goal of why we're trying to have it so high? Is there something else that we are trying to achieve by having it so high and out of space? Because it's not in line with the very same table and chairs you'd have on the sidewalk. It's just a couple of feet away in a different space. And so I certainly want to talk with the DDOT director, let them have a chance to kind of outline why they settle on that number and what the rationale is around it. But I do think we've heard pretty consistently from folks today that those fees make it just, the math doesn't math. And so from the standpoint of a small business being able to expand and activate this space, it's just going to end up being a massive disincentive to maintain. That's fairly accurate.
Chairman Allen, can I make a point on the?
Sorry, Ms. Titus, I'm sorry. I was asking Mr. Guggemos a question. I'll come
Okay.
back to you in just one second, but
Thank
let me
you.
let Mr. Guggemos respond.
You've hit it on the head. And, that's why I guess some of my testimony is far more negative than I usually would be, because you just have to look and go, what was the goal? Was the goal just to regulate it out of existence because you tax it so high, which is you want to control an industry, you tax it. And so that's, I really, that's what I'm just stumped at, but it's just not a reasonable amount. And it's not just the public space rental fee. We have our streetery endorsements with ABCA. There are other fees associated with it as well. So you've summarized it well.
Okay, I appreciate it. All right, Ms. Titus, you wanted to respond to that?
Well, actually, I wanted to respond back to responsiveness with DDOT.
Okay.
The Citizens Association of Georgetown has reached out to DDOT numerous times, and we've had issues regarding their responsiveness on both transportation and streeteries regarding the concerns that I spoke about earlier.
Okay, all right.
I wanted that for the record.
Sure, no, I appreciate that. Absolutely. Well, I appreciate everyone's testimony here. I think, again, one of the things that I kind of consistently have heard a theme over the course of the day is a recognition of the value of streeteries, not just for the business, but for the community and for the neighborhood. I think I've heard a pretty consistent interest that as we have piloted and tried these different approaches out, there is a need to move towards some standardization of what the policies and regulations are. And I haven't heard people say we don't want to have kind of standardization around the rules and regulations. What I have heard is a deep concern around the specifics of these regulations, that they potentially are going to harm the ability to maintain a streetery, harm the ability for someone to create one in exchange for what? A couple extra parking spaces, but a loss of something else. So I do believe, again, as I said, that DDOT is coming at this from a place of how do I make sure I create safe spaces? How do I help work towards standardization? How do I work towards that? But I'm also hearing a lot of feedback that says that there's a lot of confusion around what's coming on November 30th, a lot of discomfort about what those impacts could be, and a real risk that we will lose many of the streeteries that we find to be very, very valuable. I do believe, and I've heard consistently as well, the streeteries that are not working or those kind of abandoned and vacant spaces, pretty consistently people want to see those gone because they're not serving the role of what we want. So I think this has been a phenomenal cross-section of a lot of folks from our public witnesses today, which has really been helpful. So I want to thank everybody for taking time out. I want to turn now so that we can move to the Department of Transportation so we can give the DDOT director, who I want to acknowledge has been here from the very first witness. It's not every day that your agency director actually sits to listen to all that feedback. So I just want to make sure she's been off camera, but she's been listening to all the feedback throughout. I'm not sure she enjoyed all the feedback, but she absolutely took it and listened to all of it. And so we're going to switch gears now and move to our DDOT director so she has a chance to present as well. So Director Kirschbaum, I'll pull you up. And I know you've got members of your team as well. So if you want any of them to join you, of course, please feel free, or if you're going to have them sit back, your discretion. All right. Director, what we're going to do is our committee rules. We'll do a quick swearing in, then I'll turn it over to you so that you can do your presentation. And then we'll move to some questions after that. And for any of our staff that are going to be here as well, if you'll also do the oath, just so that we got everybody officially in. So if you please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you have to give to the Committee on Transportation and the Environment is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Director Kirschbaum, thanks again for being here, and let me turn it over to you.
Right. Thank you. I can still say, oh, no, it is good afternoon. Good afternoon, Council Committee Chairperson Allen, members of the committee, staff, and district residents. I am Sharon Kirschbaum, Director of the District Department of Transportation, and I will be presenting testimony on behalf of Mayor Muriel Bowser regarding the district streetery program, and I am joined by Kelsey Bridges from my team. Streeteries are designated areas in a roadway or alley used specifically for outdoor dining. Streeteries repurpose and activate public space to create a dining and gathering place for people and patrons of food establishments. They are a vital ingredient for the district's continued economic and cultural vitality. As a result of the COVID-19 public health emergency in 2020, DDOT worked closely with community stakeholders and our sister agencies to develop and implement a temporary streetery program. This temporary program helped food establishments survive by expanding outdoor dining into public space, including on the sidewalks and in parking lanes, travel lanes, alleys, and plazas. Our agency rapidly created this program to address an emergency need to safely increase food establishment seating capacity in response to indoor dining restrictions imposed during the public health emergency. Thanks to the overwhelming success of the temporary program, DDOT began extensive community outreach in 2021 to develop guidelines to support a permanent program that balances the dynamic, complex, and competing sets of needs within public space. In developing the guidelines, DDOT coordinated with restaurants, the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington, business improvement districts, Main Street organizations, advisory neighborhood commissions, DC commissions, and other district agencies. The final guidelines incorporate feedback from these community groups and provide important updates to the program, strengthening the safety, accessibility, and aesthetics of outdoor dining in public space. DDOT achieved major administrative milestones over the last year, establishing new streetery guidelines and publishing proposed rules for the program. These achievements reflect DDOT's unwavering commitment to our local businesses and vibrant neighborhoods. I will summarize the progress we have made to move the program from temporary to permanent, which provides our local businesses with greater certainty. On December 5th, 2024, the Public Space Committee adopted new guidelines to support a permanent streetery program. These guidelines, which I have attached to my testimony today, help streetery permit applicants understand design requirements and the approval process. Once adopted by the Public Space Committee, DDOT created an 11-month transition period for restaurants who come into compliance with the new requirements. We have been hosting weekly office hours for restaurants, bids, and Main Street organizations to receive specific guidance on how to move forward under the new program. On March 30th, 2025, DDOT opened public space permits to both those with existing streeteries as well as first-time applicants. We have received 54 completed applications for streetery design permits from restaurants, and these applicants have been scheduled for hearings before the PASC. We have received an additional 7 applications for streetery block permits from bids, which allow a business or multiple businesses collectively to have streeteries in a parking lane adjacent to multiple businesses, travel lane, or alley, and provide the opportunity for a comprehensive review of curbside uses along the entire block. On May 2nd, 2025, DDOT published a notice of proposed rulemaking detailing the regulatory requirements for a permanent streetery program, which I have also attached to my testimony. We're aiming to publish final rulemaking before the end of December. Since May, we have continued our extensive outreach to businesses with existing streetery permits. 3 email blasts have been sent to stakeholders regarding the permanent program, and virtual meetings were held over the summer. We also conducted in-person outreach this summer, focusing on the 176 businesses with streetery permits issued during the temporary program. These in-person visits included notifying the businesses of the permit expiration, informing them how dismantled streetery debris can be removed, and promoting office hours and available support resources. Beginning November 3rd, DDOT and DPW started removing barricades and deconstructed material from businesses who have decided not to continue operating streeteries and requested their removal. This joint effort is intended to alleviate the burden of debris removal on our small businesses. I want to emphasize that temporary streetery permits expire on Sunday, November 30th. All eligible food establishments have an obtained streetery design permit from DDOT to bring their structures into compliance with the permanent program by that date. Businesses that submitted a streetery permit application via DDOT's Transportation Online Permitting System, otherwise known as TOPS, can continue operating their existing streetery until a determination is made about their permit application, either via the permitting system or the Public Space Committee. After the temporary permits expire, DDOT will continue to work with temporary permit holders to help them understand the options available to them to bring their streeteries into compliance with a permanent program. In early 2026, DDOT will begin enforcement actions against any non-permitted streetery structure. I need to emphasize, we love streeteries. our agency is proud to have developed a robust framework for the program that balances stakeholder concerns. They allow our businesses to thrive, our streets to remain safe and accessible, and our residents to enjoy the unique streetscape the district is known for. We are building a permanent foundation for these spaces, and we are grateful to businesses and the community for partnering with us to ensure their long-term success. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Director and Ms. Bridges. I assume you didn't have testimony. You're here to help back up the director?
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure. All right, thank you very much. Let me start, I guess we'll start with maybe some basic questions, go back, and then we'll kind of drill down. When we think about our initial streetery program put in place during the pandemic, and then how that's grown toward the permanent streetery program that's set to launch. When streeteries were first made available, can you just help remind us, because it's been a couple of years, what did that approval process look like for somebody who wanted to create a temporary streetery when they were first being created? What did that look like?
So our major priority at the time during COVID was keep it simple, make it as expedited as possible. So we literally accepted sketches for what the plans were going to look like on pieces of paper, napkins. It was really, we were in the midst of a crisis and we wanted to make sure that restaurants could continue to thrive. So the guidelines were very loose, and that expediency was what was needed at the time. We did not have any fees. And for 5 years, we have tried to have some guardrails, but for the most part, we have operated with no permit fees at all and very few levers for us to do enforcement. And what's proliferated since then has been a real mixed bag. We have some streeteries that look terrible. We have some streeteries that are underused, that do have trash in them, that have restaurants that, because they're free, have not needed to invest in them. And we have others that are beautiful and people have built literally mini restaurant structures on the street. And so we have not had standards. And that again was in response to the urgency. Since that time, we have done extensive research on what other cities are doing, what best practices are out there. We've actually seen, for those cities who have moved faster than us, some pitfalls and mistakes that they've made. And we've had ample engagement on the guidelines and on the regulations to shape something that we think are reasonable and meaningful and get us to the right balance.
Great, thank you. And I did want to make sure I gave you the chance to highlight that, because when we were at the height of the crisis, I think there were probably plans that were sketched on a napkin, that really the priority at that moment was to move quickly to help these local businesses be able to survive in that moment. And so we are evolving. And again, I think I'm going to take the criticism I heard today, not from a recognition that we don't need to evolve, but there are concerns around specifics of the guidelines. But I don't think there was any difference of opinion that we are on an evolution and we need to continue moving in that direction. One of the things that I was struck by from the first panel, which was predominantly, or no, it was all ANC commissioners. Many of them did say they felt like the outreach was not to the ANCs, the outreach might have been to the bids or to the main streets. And it sounded like even some of the commissioners said they had put forward resolutions, they had put forward recommendations. And I think almost every one of them said they felt like they had not had much engagement during this process. Can you just, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, and also speak if there was something strategic about working with bids and main streets and not necessarily as robustly with the ANCs, but let me make sure I give you a chance to respond to that.
Sure. And I would say that, yes, our priority was the bids and the existing permittees in terms of our outreach and engagement. But I want to just give some context, because we also had dedicated engagement with ANCs. And I also want to differentiate between the outcome that ended up and us not listening and engaging, because I believe we had expansive engagement. Now, not everyone liked where we landed, but it wasn't because there wasn't an opportunity for people to share their input and be heard. But just by way of developing the guidelines. We began developing the guidelines in January of 21, and that included coordination with our internal DC government stakeholders, and then subsequently to the Business Improvement District, to the Restaurant Association of Washington. And that was probably October of 21 when that was really kicking off. And then subsequent to that, we had targeted outreach with ANCs, Main Streets, actually, and again, back with BIDS, Restaurant Association in July and August of 2022. In October of 24, we then had some draft guidelines that we were able to share with folks to get input. And so we had in-person and virtual meetings, and we met with the State Historic Preservation Office, the Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Council, the DC Nightlife Commission, Main Street organizations, Pedestrian Advisory Council, ANCs via 2 virtual sessions, DC Bid Council monthly meeting, restaurants through virtual information sessions twice, and then the Restaurant Association for Metropolitan Washington. So a wide scope and range of stakeholders had opportunities, specifically to the businesses and ANCs and how we consulted with them during the drafting phase. We had multiple sessions, and I wanted to share how we shaped our guidelines based on their input, because we made a number of changes. And again, you heard from the folks who said, well, this change wasn't adopted, so they didn't listen. But these are all the things that we changed based on the feedback from those meetings and from those groups. We created an administrative review process. We increased the height of overhead structures from 8 feet to 13 feet. We allowed electrical connections. We allowed lighting. We decreased the proposed annual fee. So originally it was $35 a square foot, and we dropped it down to 20. And we allowed streeteries on snow emergency routes year round. And we removed a requirement for stormwater calculations. And then subsequently, we went back and we revisited rush hour restricted roads and actually removed that designation where we thought we could, so that those restaurants could continue. So those were all things that we had started in a different place and were moved based on the feedback and input we heard.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure you have the chance to do that. And I know that having been in many community meetings with DDOT, sometimes there will be instances where people will say there was no engagement because they didn't like the outcome. That doesn't mean there wasn't engagement. I do think I heard, though, from commissioners who felt like they had put forward resolutions, they had put forward things and never heard back. And so I don't want to, I know the distinction you're making. I don't want to ascribe that to necessarily everything I heard, because I'm not sure. I thought I heard some commissioners say they tried to communicate and they just got nothing back. So I just want to note that, but I did want to make sure I gave you a chance to respond to that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. And I do want to say, and I, off the top of my head, if a resolution did slip through a crack, that might have happened. I know sometimes people email me resolutions, they don't put them in the portal. So that is possible. Oftentimes we did group some responses and have a lot of people CC'd on it. They might not have felt that that was a direct response to their question, but when we had multiple comments that were consistent, we sometimes did that to conserve back and forth. So anyway, but I do know that if we received a resolution, it was reviewed, and if there wasn't, a specific response given, it wasn't that we didn't have an opportunity to review it.
Okay. I'm going to come back to some of those changes you outlined in a moment, but let me jump into one. I think from what I've heard from a lot of folks and what we heard today, there's a lot of confusion as to what the guidelines are, how strictly they're going to be interpreted, what are the options if a streetery is non-compliant, and what are the consequences people should expect to see. If a streetery does not meet the requirements of the guidelines on the date upon which the temporary streetery permit expires, so November 30th, what is the consequence that happens on December 1st?
We are not coming through with bulldozers on December 1st to remove streeteries that are not moving, right? Our goal is to work with streeteries and restaurants to become compliant. And so, but we need to have deadlines. We need to be able to tell people, you've got to get this done. Again, last December, we had the guidelines established. In the spring, we opened up the process. So I know a lot of restaurants probably thought that things might get extended again. And so they waited and now they're feeling the crunch, but really we did not present this in a crunch time. We gave folks ample opportunity. That said, we have already said many times, and we try to assuage concerns, if you have started the process and your application has been received, you can continue to operate until we have a resolution. If you have not taken a step, we will be reaching out to you and finding out what your intent, what your plans are. We would like to see movement by January, but I'm not going to give hard dates because I think a lot of it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. If I know that there is the will to continue and to submit and we understand what's holding things up, we will work with the restaurant. But if there's a restaurant who is just hoping that this is just going to get extended again and hasn't taken any real steps to try to get into compliance, then we will at some point in early 2026 start to take some enforcement actions. And that also involves a series of, there's steps between warning letters and removal. So all of those things will be an iterative process, but we don't want to continue to kick the can down the road and push the deadline back. If a restaurant is interested in reaching compliance, we will work with you and we will make sure that we let this process, happen in the time that it's going to happen. We plan to add a public space committee hearing, special sessions if we need to get them done. But really, changing the deadline is not going to help anyone. We're here to work to make it work for them.
Okay. In your testimony, you say final rulemaking should be done by the end of December, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the expectation is that we want a business to apply for a permit, even though final rulemaking's not finished yet, which would come at the end of December. Like, why do we not align those dates such that that temporary permit would run through December 31st, so that if the idea is that you have to at least have submitted something to stave off enforcement, why would we not time that to be such after the final rulemaking comes out?
So to be clear, the guidelines are finalized. So a lot of, and I want to separate the guidelines from the rules. The guidelines are what explain what the structure needs to look like and the parameters of all of those design elements in order to get the permit. You can go down that process today. We don't need the regulations for that. The regulations do specify the fee. We do not plan to charge the fee if the regulations aren't finalized at this juncture. We can do that at any point in time. But that's the main piece that really affects the application. The others are more definitional.
The fees and the guidelines, or the fees in the final rulemaking?
The fees are in the rulemaking, in the final rulemaking. Look.
But here's what I heard from a lot of folks, right? At the price point that it's at right now, it's a math problem. They got to decide, is this financially the cost that I'm going to bear between the architectural drawings, the different pieces it's going to take to put that application in, and then the cost, at least as it is today. By December 31st, you might come back and say, hey, we heard you guys, we're actually going to drop this from 20 down to 10. You might do that, right? That might be a decision point for putting an application in the first place versus not doing it. Because we heard folks say, this is jobs, this is revenue, and at some point it's a math problem for them.
And I just want to clarify where I think the pain point is on the costs. So the cost for a parking space that would be repurposed for a streetery, we're asking for $20 a square foot. That will end up being about $2,600 a year. When you look across other cities, we talked, fine, Soho is $4,000 a year, but San Francisco, Austin, Boston, cities that are very much akin to us are also in the $2,000 range. So I think we are in the sweet spot of really where other folks, how they're charging for that spot. And we can talk later about the fact that if this was a parking spot, it would be $17,000. So we have already, I think, discounted significantly. The costs that I think people are referring to are the one-time cost to build it, right? So it's the architecture, the plans, construction, whatever else. That is, to me, something that should be contemplated, and is more significant than the $2,600 a year for what we're charging for the permit fee. So if a restaurant does not feel like they have the wherewithal to pay for all those upfront costs to build it, those again are one-time costs, they can at any point in time when they are sure of the math, apply. There's no requirement that this program is seamless. This is now a new permanent program. If they want to wait until May, if they want to wait a year, they can apply at any point in time. There's not a need to have this done, by November 30th. So they have an option to just postpone and figure out when the math does make more sense. But the thing in the regulation is not all those other costs. It's really just the square foot cost. And I have to say, I feel very good about where we landed. We did a lot of research about it. We have discounted it significantly from what a parking cost spot would be. And I think that's fair. So I'm not quite sure that would be the movement that would change people's decision to move forward or not.
Okay, so correct if I'm wrong, am I hearing you say the $20 per square foot is what you're saying is comparable to other cities, but the goal of that is to recoup the cost of what would be lost parking revenue from a meter?
I'm just saying that it is far less than the lost revenue from a meter. The lost revenue from a meter is $15,000 a square per parking space, sorry. And that is about $113 a square foot. So $113 a square foot, $20 a square foot. We have showed that we are putting a premium and we're trying to discount because we do see these as very valuable to our communities.
Okay, I mean, that number is assuming people are paying at the parking meter and then it's in constant use.
But if we were to have a shuttle bus that wanted to take over a spot, and we have those all over, that's the kind of charges that we would make them pay. So we do recoup that. That is how we value a parking spot in other circumstances.
Okay.
We make people pay for things in our public space.
Oh, I have no problem with us making people pay for public space. I'm trying to make sure that it aligns and we understand what the goals are. I mean, the flip side of what we're hearing, of course, is folks saying, well, this is how much sales and use tax gets generated by the fact that I can have these tables turning over that now generate revenue back into the city as well. And I think we heard folks say, if the math doesn't math and that cost now is so much, I'm not going to pay that public space fee basically, but now you're not going to get the sales. You may get some parking meter revenue back from it, I guess, but you're not going to be getting the sales and use tax, which is actually a lot more than the public space fee would be. So from the district's self-interest, from our own just pure selfishness here.
Which is
I
exactly why we have it at $20 a square foot. We are not trying to make this be a barrier to entry. On the contrary, we believe that this is actually a very fair and reasonable rate. And we are doing what we can to ensure that we keep this inviting as a program to restaurants. We believe the fact that we have 62 applications to date mean that plenty do find it inviting, even when they've done the full math. And keep in mind, we have costs to run the program too. We pay for the barriers to be, we've been supporting all the debris removal, getting barriers installed. And there's other significant costs just involved in review and management and future enforcement. So we don't.
Cost is significantly more than a sidewalk cafe public space permit, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so they're both public space. So I feel like the only reason I see the difference in what we're charging for that public space is because you otherwise anticipate parking meter revenue.
I think it's important to compare the sidewalk cafe, because I know that came up a few times, and it is true. An unenclosed sidewalk is $5 a square foot and an enclosed is $10 a square foot. That rate was set 30 years ago. So I would say that that is probably well below, if you were to look at sort of today dollars, what we could be charging. We want to incentivize restaurants to use sidewalk first. We want that to be their preferred option, and that's why it is less money. There's less of an opportunity cost for that space. And so it is by design that there is a differentiation between the $20 a square foot in a parking spot and the $10 for an enclosed spot or $5 on the sidewalk.
But, and this came up in one of the first panels, So let's say we heard advocacy in Georgetown, for example, move the streetery off the travel lane or the parking lane, move it onto the sidewalk right next to the building, and let the pedestrian sidewalk now extend out where the parking curb lane was. In that scenario, wouldn't I shift those tables and chairs now to be paying a sidewalk fee rather than the $20 a square foot? They'd be paying $5 a square foot, right?
Correct. Yes, and
so what's my public policy goal in that? If I am essentially I'm just swapping the spaces, and I go now from $20 per square foot to $5 per square foot, and I create a pedestrian pathway that creates a nice, safe pedestrian access. Some neighborhoods are going to have very narrow sidewalks where that's not going to be a possibility. But then we heard about the service lanes, for example, which again, great job. And I fully support what we've done there. But it has created space that now is just inherently different than a parking lane. And so I think that's one of the things I heard was, why are we not just moving towards the permanence of more public space? We're really fixated on how do I get a car to park there? And then let me equate revenue that I could get from a parking space rather than all the other things I could get out of that space being used to support businesses, to create activity and vibrancy.
Yeah.
Ms. Bridges, look, she wanted to jump in.
Yeah, no, yeah. So there's two things there. One is if we were to have, there are some ADA concerns with, depending on, like, if you have two streeteries on a block, let's just say, and then we're creating a zigzag of sidewalk along the entire frontage. That's not something that the district has done prioritized as public realm. We always say we would like to have a pedestrian clear path. I mean, you can be at the end of one block and see the end of the other and go in a direct path. And that's also part of our ADA reinforcement there, is to have that. In terms of, I think to the question about if flipping the sidewalk cafe and the streetery, how that works, the complication is who is putting in the sidewalk. And I think, right, like, we don't have a sidewalk extension program. It's a streetery program. And we have all these guidelines that say how that dynamic works. And so the difference here is that then if you have a restaurant that is wanting to participate in the streetery program, they would need to have a streetery structure and be responsible for that. And even if they did some type of flip. And I think if there was discussion over how we want to process that internally, it becomes complicated, as well as what if we need to remove the sidewalk extension? Does that mean the sidewalk cafe is being removed? And there just becomes some kind of tricky logistical issues in how they're able to use their space and how we're managing it in our system as well.
Yeah. Well, I think if I take a big step back from one kind of discrete example of that, though, I think what I hear people saying is it feels like all of this is prioritizing the parked car over public space of a sidewalk and sidewalk expansions and the different ways you can use that. And so we can absolutely go through a lot of different hoops around what do I do with that curbside park space, but both from the cost structure and how we massage where it can or can't be, it seems like the priority is on the parked car, not on how do you activate that sidewalk and expand it, make it grow, and let that be the public space. We want to have a lot of different uses to it.
So, and I don't want to conflate. I feel like there are many things that were raised, and we can have a whole separate discussion about the merits of pedestrianizing more of our public space, because we're big fans of it. We're doing it in DuPont Circle. We're looking to do it around Gallery Place and Monumental. So we are definitely on board with that. It's not just the opportunity cost for a parking spot. Within our streets, we have utilities running underneath, like the amount of effort, because we do have to do excavations, we do have to do repaving. There's many things about having a streetery in the street that makes it more complicated than a sidewalk cafe. And so it simplifies in so many ways for how we maintain our asset if they are on the sidewalk. That said, we have not created guidelines or regulatory costs to make it cost prohibitive. You've talked a lot about how the programs bring money to the city. We know, and we love that. That's one of many things of why we want to support it. But a streetery that's not invested in, that stays empty because it looks terrible and because it's not attractive to diners, brings in nothing and becomes an eyesore. And so we need to have that balance of, you need to put a little skin in the game to make sure that you're committed to it. And there is some cost to do that. I think we've learned from making it free was not a winning solution for the communities that those, lack of investment ones were in.
Agree. And I don't think that's why you heard anybody say, hey, just do nothing. I think people, I mean, even the people that are most critical said, no, we get where you're going with this. And so I don't think that's the right argument. I think you hear everyone saying, we understand we're moving that direction. When we see an abandoned, derelict space with just some dirty Jersey barriers, that's not the good use of the space. So no one's disagreeing with you on that. I think it's the finding that balance is what I hear people coming in. I frankly heard people being fairly constructive today, of kind of being very specific about these are the areas where I think it could change. So let me jump back to our public space committee. So I still think there's a lot of confusion by folks over what is and isn't going to be allowed in the guidelines. I think we heard that today. So we heard one person, for example, who I think they said that under the guidelines, because they are a restaurant that's right near a residential property, it would say they can't have a streetery, even if that resident says they do support it. But perhaps there's an appeals process through the Public Space Committee that would allow them to be able to go through that. Correct or not?
Yes, the Public Space Committee, how I've been trying to communicate this with folks is the Public Space Committee existed before streeteries and its function is the same. Streeteries is a new program that is going, that, like some folks may use that, but if you've interacted with Public Space Committee before, it typically is a way to approve or get or approve or essentially get feedback on whether you can have something that is non-standard in the public realm. So we understand it's hard to come up with a one size fits all for everything. And so that's why the guidelines are separate. So from the rulemaking, so there can be flexibility through Public Space Committee. And that option is there. And we try, we haven't had anyone go to Public Space Committee for streeteries before. A lot of times we try and give guidance on past precedent, things that have been approved before. And so we direct folks to safety folks internally of let's have them look at this location and this alley adjacency. And maybe it's that we don't want to have an overhead structure here, but maybe we could creep into the 24-foot setback. And we then as reviewers, as through that process, can write supportive reviews in TOPS before it goes to Public Space Committee. But we understand a lot of folks need to go and we want to make them the most prepared to be able to go and make their case.
Okay. How do we feel, from a capacity perspective of the PSC, to be able to render decisions or opinions quickly? How realistic is it that people are going to be able to get decisions within a month, within 2 months, within 3 months? What should the expectation be for a business that's trying to make a staffing and a business decision?
I was going to say, to get on the Public Space Committee agenda, it normally, folks have highlighted, there is a wait time, and you can look on the website to see generally when you may be heard. What is not on the website is how prepared your application is. So right through the TOPS process, there's a lot of iteration of, hey, it looks like this is missing, or things that you can fix that you're not actually asking relief from or to get some kind of modification. And that process can also take time because then someone is, you need to make changes to your plans. So once, and that happens within TOPS. Sometimes we have calls as well, or if anyone wants to have a meeting. And then once the application is ready, it can be heard. So I think there is some lead up time, but also that time is there to be able to make changes to your application. Even outside of streeteries, it's very likely when someone submits something, they may have missed something on their application and they need to make a revision. And then once that's done, their application is ready to be heard.
Okay. And how often does the Public Space Committee meet?
So the Public Space Committee currently meets monthly, but we are willing to add extra sessions when we have, a sizable number that are and have them dedicated to streetery sessions. just because we know that there's probably going to be an influx. A lot of people waited to the last minute. And so we need to add some hearings in December. We'll do that in January. We want to get through them. We don't want people to wait. But as Kelsey said, your first bite at the apple to get insight about your application is not in that meeting. Through the TOPS process, you'll hear from our reviewers. And so at least you will have the strongest possible portfolio of, application that gets reviewed.
So what are the factors that the Public Space Committee would be looking for to approve an exception? I mean, we've talked about, for example, I know you and I talked about this one when someone brought this to me, that the guidelines say, for example, you can't have a streetery next to a street tree, but really the intent around that was around low branches where someone might hurt the tree to have that. But if you were a really tall tree and your branches were, that probably wouldn't. How do you determine what that exception would be? Or the example we heard today of a neighbor who would support it, but would technically not meet the guidelines. What are the factors that they use to approve an exception? Is it a gut call? What is it?
So the Public Space Committee does rely heavily on the reviewers because they have expertise in specific areas. So an example you brought up is trees. Our Urban Forestry Division is a reviewer. They also helped inform the guidelines of what is needed to be able to like maintain trees, get in there, also make sure the trees have space to grow as well, and protect a streetery at the same time while trying to do all those things. So if there is a location that would come in that is wanting some type of relief from the trees, the tree distance, they could reach out to the arborist and have a conversation of, okay, this is what we would like to propose here. Could you give us some feedback on the tree canopy at this location? And generally, they're very responsive and happy to also meet on site to even identify what is proposed with the existing tree. That's one example.
Yeah, I just want to add too. We do have in the 24 DCMR 100, it actually sort of walks through what our parameters are for the Public Space Committee. And it's, if a proposed use is not a threat to public safety, it would not interfere with other uses, et cetera. It's sort of got a framework within which they need to make considerations. And I just need to underscore what we heard this morning was a lot of one size doesn't fit all. And we know that. Guidelines are our starting point. And if you can be vanilla and fit in the guidelines, it's an easy yes. We have the Public Space Committee as the exception because we know there are going to be so many one-off questions. And this is the opportunity for us to review on a case by case. So it's hard to give blanket. That's why it's an exception, right? Because I feel like everyone that comes up is going to be somewhat unique. And that's the opportunity for us to use some discretion.
Well, I guess what I think people are looking for is some certainty around what those factors would be. I'm going to pick one example. Streeteries can't be within 25 feet from an alley. All right. Well, let's say it's the building that's on the alley and they don't have an ability to actually go anywhere else. Is a factor saying, you know what, we said 25, but really we need to see 10. Or is it 5? Or is it 15? Like, I think like if the business needs to have some certainty about what those factors are, because what's the point of even spending the money on an architectural drawing or any of that if I don't know if there's going to be an exception or what the factor is going to be if I happen to be that business on an alley? Because I really feel like you're telling me you're losing your streetery. There's no way around it when I read the guidelines.
Yeah, for safety elements, that is definitely anything that we require that would be listed in there as a safety concern, such as visibility, or we have the barriers and things in there. We wanted to provide essentially the guidance that aligns with the design and engineering manual, which is our source of how we do our projects. And then, but there are times where you have to look at context. And so it's hard to say like, here we could go 8 feet, there we'll go 25 feet without like being able to look at a specific location. I can tell you that we are working closely with the safety team to think about considerations for, as I had mentioned, an overhead structure maybe not be appropriate to be within that 24 feet, but we may be able to have dining, which could be essentially a similar height to a vehicle if it was parked there. So we are having those conversations, but it is without being able to see the specific locations, it's hard to give a broad, this is something that would be allowed.
But do you see where the frustration's coming from businesses that their temporary permit expires in 3 weeks? They won't see enforcement as long as an application has been put in, but they don't know if it's even worth putting the application in, which has costs, because they don't know. I mean, if you're a business on the edge of an alley or within one building of it, you don't know that. So why would you spend all the money and time right now thinking if that's even a possibility or if there could be an exception? Because the system right now feels like it's telling you absolutely not. And you'd have to spend a lot of money and time and effort to then find out maybe there is an exception, but now those are all sunk costs.
That's fair. We have, I think, Director Kirschbaum mentioned too, office hours, which we have been hosting since May. They're easier, pretty simple to sign up for. You send us an email for which Monday you want to be, and then we put you in the slot and send you the Teams link. And through there, folks are they can come as prepared with a plan or questions. We've had a variety of different types of functions of that meeting. You don't have to have a site plan. Maybe it's, this is my existing streetery. What is allowed? And we have had 48 businesses so far come to those office hours. It's generally about 3 restaurants can come in every Monday. It's about an hour. And that is a really great way to receive feedback from for these types of questions, and also follow up if there is a question that is unable to be answered at that specific session.
But they're not able to speak for the Public Space Committee in there, right? So they're not going to be able to say, hey, yeah, I know it says 25 feet, but I think we can do 15. Like, they can't give them that answer, right?
They cannot approve something that does need to go to Public Space Committee, but they can provide expertise on something they can support. And then if it's something that staff can support, they would document that in TOPS. And that's something that Public Space Committee looks at when they're looking at any type of application, then informing their decision to make on whether something should be approved or not as a deviation.
We're through the Public Space Committee, we are trying to get to yes. We want to use the office hours to give folks an early indication of whether they're on the right track and things seem like they would be viable. There is a difference between a heavy use alley and a driveway that the restaurant owns. All of those things would make a difference. And during the office hours, that information can be shared. Again, it's not an approval unless it's fully meeting the guidelines, but beyond that, I'm not quite sure what else we can do. We'll tell the restaurant if it's a long shot, and here's why. But for the most part, we're trying to get to yes, and we're trying to figure out what that compromise would be so they can get to yes.
Right. I mean, I think we're hearing, though, from multiple businesses today that the way this is structured is having a chilling effect on their decision. Should they even do this or not? Should they just go ahead and pack it up? Let me ask about the issue that we heard several times around, and again, I know that from DDOT's perspective, it's coming from a place of safety. So I'm not questioning that. But the issue around no sidewalls, essentially. And what we heard is a lot of businesses that know how these things actually operate, I have to have some type of enclosure to be able to make this last through the winter. Otherwise, there is no point. And so the guidelines allow or don't allow for a clear wall, for example.
And we spent a lot of time thinking about this question. And the guidelines today do not allow for a transparent enclosed wall. That is by design. And I'll tell you, I think the first comment you made of the whole point of these is to last through the winter. So the whole point of these originally was to have open air dining so it would be safe during COVID.
But we
It
said
was
that-
not to build
said that this
little
is
mini
about
buildings.
pollution.
Right. No, okay, but I just want to be clear on the whole point. The whole point is not to build a structure in our street. It is to have open air dining. It is to help revitalize, but also it creates the energy of having an open space. It is seasonal. We do know that people don't use sidewalk cafes in the winter. We know that they're in the winter, while we do allow for some heating, the intent was not that during rain and snow, people were going to be sitting out in these. Even plexiglass has a glare. There's concern about the safety of having the transparency. So I know that it sounds like an easy thing that it's open, but there are still concerns, even if it's a clear plexiglass wall.
All right. So what I'm hearing is if I were a business that came into my office hours and said, all right, I'm going to try to do a clear panel here. Would that work for an exception? Based on that answer, I'm assuming the office hours told them no.
I would say, yeah. The, essentially
Yeah,
there are,
sorry, just
yes,
yes,
yes.
the answer would be
That,
okay.
that they would tell, and that's because there's, I think, a difference between the safety flexibility that about being closer to an intersection or an alley entrance and having something that does completely block visibility. And even something that is clear does have reflection and it does create some type of visual blockage. So going back to that safety element, there wasn't a solution that we could immediately identify that would create the same safety element, and therefore it would be hard to make some kind of concession in that instance.
I just want to add too, that we did look across other cities and we did not find another city that has that allowed.
Okay. I want to know we've been joined by Councilor Brianna Nadeau. So Councilor Nadeau, I'll turn to you in just a second for some questions. I'll just wrap up one quick thought and then I'll turn it over to my colleague here. We talked about the timing of this. And again, what I keep hearing from folks around the confusion of knowing where does context matter? Where am I able to apply for an exception? How is this going to work? And we have the final rulemaking coming at the end of December, most likely, but they've got to get this in by the end of November. We've heard a lot of concern around the price per square foot. Is that something that you're willing to revisit by December 31st in the final rulemaking? Does the testimony you've heard today at all make the agency think that through?
I don't think that the $2,600 for the parking spot, most would be an average of size of 2, that $5,000 a year is the make or break. I think it's the construction costs to build a compliant streetery that is more of a deterrent. And it is a one-time cost. And I get that restaurants need to determine whether it's, the juice is worth the squeeze for them to pursue it right now. But I do feel like the $20 a square foot, we did a lot of research. It feels fair. To me, I can't imagine if a restaurant can't pay $6,000 for expanding their space. I mean, if you think about if they were to try to find a lease where, you would never find a lease in the entire city that could be for $20 a square foot or less. Restaurants have had 5 years of having free access to the public space. I think we're spot on that. And I would be surprised if that's the real barrier for folks applying.
I think that enough people brought it to us, I wouldn't dismiss it. And I think that because we see such a disparity between the sidewalk cafe, the sidewalk seating, it again just to me feels like we have different goals of what we're trying to accomplish with this. That if it's about I want to recover cost recovery revenue for a paid parking space versus helping that business be able to have the tables, the business, get that sales and use tax. I think if I am in self-interest mode here, the district does better by having that outdoor seating. I will make more money as the district for sales and use tax and the income tax on the employees and my tax revenue is better by having that parking space be tables and chairs than it is for a car.
That is why we are not trying to discourage restaurants. We are trying to preserve the public space, and we do need to do that, but we are making it, to me, a very viable option. And again, we've already talked about why $5 for the outside cafe that was set in 1970 is probably not a good benchmark for what public space, even that doesn't have the same opportunity cost of a parking spot. But there are other factors when you are in, not only is it for parking, again, anytime a utility needs to get in, if there's an emergency or any sort of upgrades, all of these things, it adds to the complexity. Every time we need to do repaving or restriping, all of these things mean that when it is in the roadway, there is a cost for that.
I don't deny that. This is our last comment. I'll turn to Councilor Nadeau. I'm not trying to recover my costs. In the same way, I don't want my metro fare to be the true cost of that ride. It's public space. I get so many other benefits that are so hard to quantify by saying, yeah, $5 a square foot for that outdoor patio seating on the sidewalk. I get eyes on the street. I get an active, vibrant sidewalk. I improve public safety. I improve vitality of an entire community. I build social capital. I build community. Sure, $5 sounds great. I don't need to mark that up from 1970. I think that's fine because the other pieces that are so much harder to quantify are also benefits that accrue to all of us. And I know you agree with that. Those are benefits that we accrue. And so I don't need to try to match here. I just need market to market value back.
We are subsidized. This program is heavily subsidizing in the same way that the metro fare is. We are subsidizing it by $95 when it's at 20, right? It's $113 per square foot is what the actual market, what the rate of it is.
Put a
And we're
price
actually
then
charging
on
20.
all the other things I get, right? Like we get so much more for a community and for a neighborhood with these active, vibrant spaces. So
We're both saying
we're going to go round and round on this. I know, but
different price point.
I am concerned when I hear this many businesses come back and say, this is a price point that makes it much harder for me to make the math work, to make this business viable, to make this streetery work. We are not on opposite sides, I think, from everyone that we heard today, that creating smart, standardized processes, putting forward regulations, making sure that it has that balance. I didn't hear anybody saying, we just got to scrap this thing. We don't want to do it. I think I heard a lot of people saying there's a lot of merit to what DDOT has been doing for the last couple of years, building towards this. It's the elements of getting the right balance. And this is one where I don't think we're landing in the right balance point yet. But let me turn to my colleague so that Councilor Nadeau has a chance to ask some questions. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Director and team. Director, are you concerned about the number of streeteries that may be going away even with the applications you've received?
So as of today, we've had 62 applications of the about 139 sort of active permits. I believe that we're still going to get many more. I'll tell you, in New York City, I think they ended up with 10% continuing on. We've had, many cities when they've done a new permanent program, there's been a huge drop. I would say the fact that we're already at about half and there's still a lot of time left, I would not say it's cause for concern.
I'd mainly like to focus on 18th Street and Adams Morgan since there are unique circumstances there. As we heard from witnesses, the current streeteries on 18th Street are incredibly popular among both residents and businesses. And I'll start by asking directly, Adams Morgan wants the streeteries to stay. Why can't they?
We would love to have the streeteries stay. We in no way are precluding the streeteries from staying. Of the 25 streeteries that participated in the pilot, when we polled them about, would you be interested in participating in the permanent program? And again, this would be when the sizes would be right-sized. So we did say we were going to have to make them smaller. Only 3 said they were interested in participating. So I don't know what's behind that. But that's not because we're trying to discourage them from continuing.
Is it correct that the platforms on 18th Street are wider than the standards set by the permanent regulations?
Correct.
So either the agency designed and installed platforms that you knew would not be compliant, or you established regulations that made your own design non-compliant. Which was it?
The program was a pilot program. We actually chose 18th Street because those were probably the most problematic streeteries in the city in terms of being a mismatch of things and of complaints. So we tried to standardize it. We were moving with the information that we had at the time. And again, we had not finalized the standards yet. So at the time, those were the structures we put in, and those actually matched what the temporary ones looked like, but that was not where we landed in the long run.
What do you mean by a mismatch?
I just meant that I don't know how to describe what the 18th Street do you have a better way to describe it?
I would say a lot of them also had were very tall structures. There were a lot of visibility concerns between being on the sidewalk or on the street and being able to see people in what is a very heavily pedestrianized area at nighttime and during the day. And so wanting to put in something there as a pilot to improve a lot of those concerns was something that we considered when we selected that location.
All right. So is it correct that now DDOT's about to remove 100% of those platforms?
Yes.
When is that scheduled to occur?
I believe a memo was sent out earlier this week, and it is essentially the beginning of December is when restaurants are expected to be prepared to have the decking removed. But the November 30th date, I believe, on the memo is when they'll still request to have all of the tables and any other type of decor that's out there removed.
Is DDOT bearing the cost of removal?
Yes.
What's the cost of removal?
It's about $100,000.
What's the plan for that infrastructure?
We have some interest in having extended sidewalks in another area of the district.
Where?
We're looking at downtown.
That is typical. Okay. Is any of it going into storage?
We would be doing temporary storage, but then we are hoping to be able to reinstall in the spring.
What's the long-term cost of that storage?
We're storing it on DDOT property, so there's no cost.
If a business on 18th Street does want to keep their streetery, would it be able to retain the platforms that DDOT provided?
At this point, we're removing them all. No, those are modular. They fit together well. We're going to keep them together. And those restaurants are in the same position that everyone else is in the city in terms of building out a streetery that is compliant.
And why are we doing sidewalk extension downtown instead of Adams Morgan?
There are plans downtown to pedestrianize certain areas, and this is a good way to pilot it. And there was not a demand for streeteries along that corridor. There were 3 that indicated an interest. So,
well, there's a desire to pedestrianize Adams Morgan. We've been trying to pedestrianize it for years, decades.
We built those as part of a streetery pilot.
But now you're using them to expand sidewalks.
In a different neighborhood, yes.
But why not ours?
Well, I'll tell you, you've also been on all the emails that I have where there are some rabid complaints about the lack of freight and loading space. And so this is an opportunity for us to add curbside space that hasn't been available. And there have been restaurants and businesses on the corridor that said they didn't want them. So, we're also trying to keep in mind those other stakeholder needs. And I'll tell you right now, loading on 18th Street is problematic, and trucks all day are taking the full travel lane, and it's suboptimal. And so there's a way we can add streeteries for those that want it, and add curbside space for freight and scooter parking and bike parking and everything else.
But that doesn't mean that you couldn't use some of those for sidewalk extensions.
For the 3 streeteries, to use the 3 platforms for those? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm saying it could be something bigger. So how much do the businesses that are getting the sidewalk extensions downtown have to pay for them? Per square foot?
We're still in early stages of it. And
are you planning to charge them per square foot?
We didn't charge anyone. We paid for the platform.
Well, but now we have a framework. But now everybody's going to have to pay to use public space, but not downtown?
I don't have an answer to that right now. Things are still at a nascent stage. Yes, I don't have an answer right now.
If those platforms were paid for, designed, and installed by the district, why are we not leaving things up to the individual businesses? Why are we now leaving things up to the individual businesses?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, those platforms were paid for, designed, and installed by the district. And now we're leaving things up to the businesses. They participated in that pilot, and then now they're being told those aren't compliant, so they're going away. So you're on your own, and you have to, pay for whatever you want to do.
I guess I would frame it as the pilot is over. The restaurants who are interested in having a streetery that's compliant is in the exact same position that every other restaurant is in the city. And we own them, we maintain them. They were never owned or maintained by the business or by the bid. And so I'm not quite sure why folks are worse off by us taking them back when the pilot ends.
Okay. So if somewhere like 17th Street in DuPont or 18th Street in Adams Morgan is fully designed by your agency to account for and accommodate streetery space, why isn't that treated more as a redesign of the streetscape itself?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. So if somewhere like 17th Street in DuPont or 18th Street in Adams Morgan is fully designed by your agency to account for and accommodate streetery space, why isn't that treated more like a redesign of the streetscape itself?
Are you just still trying to make sure? So like if we were to redesign the street, I guess there's a question of like, should it be considering these other public space desires for maybe the function that the streeteries were performing, such as dining, more dining space? Is that what you're
Well, like
asking?
for example, the design of 11th Street with the bike project took into consideration other investments that DDOT had made and the streeteries there.
We are not redesigning 18th Street to prevent streeteries from happening. There are still the opportunity for any street or any restaurant who wants to participate to have a streetery.
I'm going to keep going. Okay. We've got business vacancies on 11th Street in Columbia Heights that has on a block that has a block long streetery for years now. And instead of the whiplash of adding and removing the infrastructure, would it be possible for that space to be retained as a parklet or sidewalk extension in the interim?
I know that the project manager there has been coordinating with my team to talk like about what streeteries do we know are wanting to participate and remain it with the new program, while also thinking about the 11th Street project they're working on. And we are trying to have those conversations of like what the needs and preferences of the businesses there are and accommodate those into the design. But the nature of the project isn't the 11th Street cycle track isn't to put in move the curb essentially. So it's just a different scale than I think being able to put in something that does have permanence in that way.
Okay. I mean, I share the concerns of all of the Ward 1 ANCs who testified today and the business owners. And I think that, for us, especially with this Adams Morgan situation, we so appreciated having that pilot and that investment. To have that investment taken away and given to downtown is just more of the same for us, frankly. We still have issues in Adams Morgan with sidewalk space and pedestrian usage and safety. And I do agree that we need to address the loading issue in some way, but not like this. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nadeau. All right, we're trying to wrap this up. Okay, so if the platforms from 18th Street are being moved where exactly?
For now, when the pilot ends, we'll be putting them into storage, and we have some plans. We are.
I mean, is this the gallery place?
Yes.
Pedestrianization?
To do this as a short term before we make it more permanent.
Okay. Who's going to be paying the $20 per square foot?
We're looking to do a pedestrianizing and expanded sidewalk within the whole vicinity that would be permanent. So that would actually then be the new sidewalk. That's where we're going.
So we can do that. All right. I wasn't sure if we were charging ourselves the $20 per square foot for those.
It's not a streetery program.
But there's parking there. and our parking spots were $15,000 a year. So now we've lost the parking revenue. I'm okay with pedestrianization. I just want consistency.
No, that's fair. And I think it is also, as the director highlighted, part of, there are plans for in the works for downtown, and this is also a pilot.
We funded that, I know.
What I'm just saying, right, like this is a pilot as well. So it isn't just, if anyone does want a streetery, they would need to participate in the streetery program, but it is a pilot similar to what was in Admo as well.
Got it. And I should expect then we're fully funding the Plaza Act to support the pedestrianization of 3 other corridors.
You fully funded the Plaza Act. Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking, DDOT's going to put the money in for the full 3 corridor pedestrianization of the Plaza Act?
There was money put in. Again, that is pedestrianizing, meaning closing things down to traffic is different than extending the sidewalks, but we have plans and we'll talk about them.
Thank you. All right. So before we wrap up, let's make sure we have clear set timelines for everybody, even though I still believe there's a significant amount of confusion that exists. At the end of this month, November 30th, that is when the temporary streetery permits will expire. On December 1st, enforcement could begin, but you've said in your testimony, DDOT will not begin enforcement on December 1st for someone with an expiring temporary streetery permit. But I want to make sure I'm stating it correctly.
Our enforcement efforts will start in January of 2020. We'll start in early 2026. So in December, we will do outreach. We will understand for those who haven't submitted what their plans are. We will give warnings. We'll let people know that we'd like to see decisions and an action one direction or the other. But in terms of any sort of enforcement, that would not be until early 2026.
Well, I would take a warning letter as enforcement. So you're saying you will be enforcing, but with warnings in
Well,
December?
let's say we will be doing outreach in December, and then we would start with the warning and any other sort of escalations from there in 2026.
All right. And final rulemaking, which might actually impact my decision about whether or not I should be applying or not, but that's going to come into December.
And yes, and again, the cost in that is the $20 a square foot. It has nothing to do with the other costs for architectural designs, plans, and then the actual construction. Those are really independent of the regulations.
And I know you disagree, but I believe from what we've heard from several businesses that $20 per square foot is a decision point on what they would do, especially when we hear from several places that have not just one, but they have multiple parking spaces, curbside spaces they've had for a number of years. But again, I'm not opposed to charging something. I'm with you on that it's not just free. It's what the price point is. And I believe that price point is too high. I think we've heard that from a lot of others. And I would ask you to consider that before the final rulemaking comes down at the end of December.
Understood. I can't, I know you've heard me say it again and again, that we had ample opportunity for input and feedback. We made modifications based on that. We did a lot of research. We feel really good about where we landed. If a restaurant isn't sure that they want to proceed, they don't need to, and they can make that decision when they are ready. This is not a program that's changing. We did want to provide certainty. That was the one thing that we heard again and again, was during this, temporary period, restaurants just wanted to know where we landed so they could make an informed decision. We've given them that certainty. If now's not the time and they want to wait, then we'll help take it down. We will remove all the debris for free for you. And then when you're ready, we hope you'll apply. But our goal is to make it easy. If you look at the guidelines that we have on our website, if you look at all the information about the process steps, I believe we have done a superlative job at making it simple. And I know that people may think I did on a napkin before, that's how it should work, but they're getting a certificate of occupancy from Department of Buildings. A lot of them have electrical hookups. These are facilities that we want to make ADA accessible, and so people can access it in a wheelchair with mobility challenges. There are a lot of things that require some effort and investment, but I think we've made it as simple as possible. And if they were building out their restaurant, this would be far more challenging.
I'm not going to, because we've already had a healthy back and forth on it, so I'm not going to try to repeat all of it. I don't believe this is introducing certainty. The number of exceptions that people can go through, the lack of clarity about whether that exception would be supported, the factors and nuance about it, I don't actually think creates the certainty that those businesses are looking for. And that's why I'm concerned about this taking effect. I know you don't want to kick the can. I don't think it's kicking the can. I do believe we should give folks more time to be able to line this up. Don't want to restart the whole conversation we had an hour ago, but I don't believe it's creating the certainty that is not, and again, I want you and your staff to hear me say this, like it's not taking away from what is a worthwhile effort of creating standardization, of moving and evolving this as it is. I know that a lot of hard work has gone into that. There are just some elements of where these guidelines land that I disagree with. I think I'm hearing a lot of others disagree with. And that's where I'd love to continue working to try to land those aspects of it.
And I am sorry, I know I didn't mean to cut you off, but when we went through the process of reviewing and having public engagement on the guidelines and on the regulations, there were a lot of people who had many other opinions. I know today we heard from restaurants and we heard from some bids, but there were many other voices there. So again, we're trying to listen to all of them. I don't know if more time makes a difference, because I just need to say this and I'll let you wrap up. We want to work with the restaurants. We know that the Public Space Committee is there for exceptions. I don't know how to provide any more certainty than they have their day in court. We give them advanced engagement to give them some sense of whether it's going to be approved or not. But everyone said today, it's a case-by-case thing. One size doesn't fit all. So we have standards, and then we have the Public Space Committee for the exceptions to get to the case-by-case. So again, I don't think it's the process that's the problem. It may be that people wish they had started a few months ago so they'd have certainty by now, but we get that things might take time. We are not.
That's what it is.
Okay.
I do think I'm not sure if we're completely aligned about what the actual goals are of this. And I think that the desire for certainty and not seeing it is why we're at the point where we are. And I think that what I'm hearing people say is the lack of certainty is what will create a just inability to even move forward, or inability to put an application forward. And my fear is we're not just going to be able to remove those street areas that which I think we all agree that one has not, that one has failed. It is not being used, and that probably is not the best use of that public space. My concern is we're going to have streeteries that are good uses of those public spaces and have been supporting those local businesses and been active parts of a community neighborhood, that this doesn't provide that level of certainty and doesn't streamline and share the same goals, and we're not going to see those move forward and we're going to lose them. And I think it's very hard 6 months from now, 12 months from now to get them back. So we will follow up after the hearing. This won't be the last conversation, I'm sure, on this. But with that, we've gone longer than I probably thought we would at 9 o'clock this morning. So this is going to conclude the committee's public oversight roundtable on the district's streetery program. The record for today's hearing is going to close on November 21st, 2025, and the committee will accept written testimony through the council's hearing management system, which can be found on the council's website at dccouncil.gov/hearings. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. The next meeting of the committee will be next Thursday, November 13th, when the committee will hold a public hearing on Bill 26-135, the Purple Heart License Plate Amendment Act of 2025. There being no further business before the committee, the time is now 1:43 p.m. and this public hearing of the Committee on Transportation and the Environment is now adjourned. Thanks.